In the hush between sunset and night, when the air feels heavy with everything left unsaid, a sound breaks the stillness inside the Hartwell mansion. A child's scream. It isn't anger. It's terror. 6 years old, frightened and wordless, little Eli Hartwell thrashes in his room as the world folds in on itself. Downstairs, house staff freeze in place, afraid to move without orders. And in the middle of this chaos, one woman, a cleaner named Maya Ellison, steps forward. What happens next will silence an entire household, shake a billionaire's heart, and quietly rewrite what love looks like. If you believe dignity should never depend on money or title, tap like to help this message travel. The clock in the west corridor struck 8 as the evening wind swept through the Hartwell mansion. The place was built to be impressive. Polished marble, glass walls, the kind of silence that only money could afford. Yet tonight, that silence was shattered by a cry so raw it made the chandeliers tremble. Eli Hartwell's room was on the second floor, down the hall of soft blue walls that glowed faintly under recessed light. The boy was 6 years old, small for his age, his hair dark and fine, his hands pressed hard against his ears as if to hold the world out. He wasn't being defiant. He was scared, overwhelmed by sound, light, and too much motion. Downstairs, the staff looked at one another. The child's episodes were known, and every manual said the same thing. Wait for Mr. Hartwell. So they waited, frozen between fear and obedience. Moments later, the heavy doors swung open. Julian Hartwell, the billionaire CEO of Hartwell Industries, had returned from a 12-hour board meeting. His jaw was tight, his phone still glowing with unread messages. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice controlled but sharp. "Sir, it's Eli," one of the nannies stammered. "He started screaming when the lights flickered. We tried to calm him, but he—" Julian was already climbing the stairs 2 at a time, his expensive shoes echoing against the marble. The scream grew louder. It wasn't anger, it was panic, the sound of a mind overwhelmed by the world. Inside the room, toys lay scattered. The overhead lights were too bright. Eli's breathing came in short bursts, his body trembling. He had pulled his blanket off the bed and crouched beneath the desk, rocking back and forth. His father stopped at the doorway, helpless. Every therapist, every expert, had told him not to force touch, not to raise his voice. So he did nothing, except watch, his throat tight, his heart beating too fast. And then behind him, a quiet voice said, "Sir, may I?" Julian turned. It was Maya Ellison, one of the house cleaners. Young, mid-30s maybe, with soft brown skin and calm eyes that carried a kind of steady light. She had arrived only 3 weeks ago, invisible, efficient, polite. "This isn't your role," Julian began, but she was already walking toward the room. "Wait." Maya stepped through the doorway slowly, as if approaching a wild bird. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Hi there, sweetheart," she murmured, not expecting an answer. "It's too bright in here, isn't it?" Without asking anyone, she reached for the dimmer switch. The room softened instantly. The harsh white turned to a warm amber glow. She then sat down cross-legged on the carpet, not beside Eli, not too near, just far enough for him to see her without feeling cornered. "Do you remember this?" she asked softly, lifting her right hand and tracing a small circle over her heart, then touching the floor, a sign she used to teach comfort. "Safe here." Eli froze mid-rock. His eyes flicked to her hand. The rhythm of his breath changed, still shaky but slower. Julian's chest tightened. No one had ever gotten him to pause like that. "It's okay," Maya whispered again. "You don't have to talk. Just breathe, in and out, like this." She exaggerated her breath, deep and slow, letting the sound of air fill the silence instead of words. Eli's fingers uncurled slightly. He rocked once more, then stopped. His eyes glistened. For a long moment, he simply watched her breathe. Then, carefully, he mirrored her. A tiny inhale, a tiny exhale. The room felt different. The panic had turned into something fragile and still. Maya reached for a small wooden toy on the floor, a car with chipped paint. She rolled it gently across the carpet, not toward him, but beside her, letting it circle slowly, waiting. The wheels made a soft rhythm. Eli's gaze followed it. Another minute passed before he crawled out from under the desk, one knee at a time, and reached for the toy. Julian didn't realize he was holding his breath until he heard his own exhale. The boy's trembling stopped completely when Maya whispered, "That's it. Good job, baby." She didn't touch him, only smiled, humming a slow tune, the kind that has no melody but feels like a heartbeat. After a while, Eli's head drooped. He yawned once, twice, then leaned sideways until his shoulder brushed Maya's arm. It was the smallest gesture, but to Julian, it was a miracle. Maya froze, not wanting to break the spell. She waited until his breathing grew even. Then, with practiced care, she eased him onto his pillow, covering him with the fallen blanket. His small hand reached out mid-sleep and found her fingers. He didn't let go. Julian stepped forward without realizing it. The light caught on the edge of his watch. For the first time in years, he whispered a thank you that carried more relief than command. Maya looked up briefly, her eyes gentle. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "you don't fix the storm. You just sit through it with them." He nodded, not fully understanding, but feeling something move in his chest that had long been still. Down the hallway, the house had fallen silent again. Staff stood frozen, unsure what they had just witnessed. Julian looked one last time at his son sleeping peacefully, still clutching Maya's fingers. Then he turned off the lights. "Stay with him," he said softly. "I will," she answered. And for the first time in the mansion's long, glittering history, silence didn't feel like emptiness. It felt safe. Morning crept slowly through the tall windows of the Hartwell mansion. The first light spilled across polished floors and glass walls, painting the house in soft gold. It was a beautiful home. Too beautiful, perhaps. A place designed to impress the world more than to hold it. Yet that morning, something about it felt different. There was warmth in the quiet, a new kind of stillness that didn't echo. Julian Hartwell sat alone in his study, a cup of untouched coffee cooling beside him. On his laptop screen was the overnight security footage from Eli's room. The same moment replayed again and again. Maya kneeling on the carpet, breathing softly, the boys trembling, fading under her calm. Julian had watched it 3 times already, unsure what astonished him more, that his son had calmed, or that the person who had done it was not a specialist, not a therapist, but a cleaner he barely knew. He pressed pause. The image froze on Maya's face, patient, grounded, her expression unreadable yet full of care. A quiet knock came at the study door. "Sir?" It was Marion Calloway, his chief of staff and head of household HR, holding a tablet. Her tone was careful, the way people speak when they're unsure if good news is safe to deliver. Julian motioned for her to enter. "I reviewed the footage from last night," she said, placing the tablet on the desk. "Ms. Ellison's intervention was unconventional. but effective. Julian raised an eyebrow. Unconventional? She entered the child's space without clearance, dimmed the lights without authorization, and used... Marian hesitated, searching for the right word. What appears to be sign-based communication. I believe she learned it from personal experience. Julian leaned back in his chair. The businessman in him wanted to label it as a breach of protocol. But the father, the part of him he had nearly forgotten how to be, only heard one thing. His son had felt safe. Did Eli sleep through the night? He asked. 8.5 hours, Marian said. No panic episodes since. Julian rubbed his eyes, exhaling. That's the longest in 6 months. Downstairs, the house was waking up. The faint clatter of breakfast trays, the aroma of coffee and toast, the muted hum of the morning staff routine. Maya was already in the kitchen, wiping the counters she had cleaned the night before, as if the previous evening's event hadn't happened. When Julian entered, she straightened quickly, tucking a stray braid behind her ear. "Good morning, Mr. Hartwell," she said. Her voice was polite, distant, careful. "Good morning," he replied, unsure how to start. The words that came out next were strange in his own mouth. "You did something extraordinary last night." Maya shook her head. "He did something extraordinary, sir. I just made space for it." Julian studied her face. There was no trace of pride, only humility and focus. He gestured toward the breakfast table. "Please sit. I'd like to ask you a few things about Eli." She hesitated, glancing at the uniformed chef who was pretending not to listen. "It's all right," Julian said. "You're not in trouble." Reluctantly, Maya took the seat across from him. She looked uncomfortable, surrounded by crystal and silverware that seemed to belong to another world. Julian began carefully. "You mentioned last night that you used to work with children. Where was that?" "At a community center in Eastbrook," Maya said. "We ran programs for kids with sensory sensitivities and nonverbal communication. I wasn't a therapist, just a volunteer." "How did you know what to do with Eli?" She smiled faintly. "Every child has a rhythm. When you listen long enough, you can feel it." His rhythm was chaos, fast, sharp. So I slowed mine, that's all. Julian nodded slowly. So I slowed mine. The sentence echoed in his mind like an instruction he didn't yet know how to follow. After a pause, he said, "Eli hasn't trusted anyone since his mother passed, not even me. You walked into that room, and within minutes..." He stopped himself, afraid of how vulnerable he sounded. "I'd like to extend your role, formally." Maya blinked. "Sir? I want you to assist with Eli's daily care. We'll increase your pay, and you'll have flexible hours. You'll work alongside the therapy staff. I'll have Marian draw up a contract." She looked down at her hands. "Mr. Hartwell, I appreciate the offer, but I don't want to overstep. I was hired to clean, not to..." Julian interrupted gently. "You were hired to keep the house in order. And last night, you did that better than any of us." For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, a sparrow tapped at the window, filling the silence with tiny, hopeful knocks. Maya finally nodded. "All right, but I'll need to adjust Eli's environment. Fewer harsh lights, softer sounds, more predictable routines." "Do whatever you think necessary," Julian said. "Just help him feel safe." Marian entered again with a folder. "Sir, the therapist arrives at 10. Should I inform her of the new arrangement?" Julian nodded. "Yes, Maya will be joining the session." When Marian left, Maya gathered her things. "Thank you for trusting me, Mr. Hartwell." He smiled, a little awkwardly. I'm still learning how to do that." As she walked down the hallway toward Eli's room, Julian watched her go, realizing she moved through the mansion differently than anyone else. Not with fear, not with entitlement, but with quiet purpose, like she belonged to something deeper than money. Later that morning, from his office upstairs, Julian could hear soft laughter, a rare sound, hesitant but real. He looked out and saw through the glass balcony Maya and Eli sitting on the floor with colored blocks spread around them. She was stacking them by color. He was knocking them down and laughing each time. Every time he knocked them over, she whispered, "Again." No frustration, no scolding, just rhythm. Blue block, red block, yellow, crash, laughter. Julian stood there, stunned by how simple it all seemed. Not a therapy session, not a formula or strategy, just patience and joy. When Maya finally noticed him watching, she smiled and lifted a small green block in his direction. A quiet invitation. Julian hesitated. The idea of sitting on the floor with his son felt ridiculous. But then he saw Eli glance toward him, eyes curious instead of fearful. So Julian walked down, loosened his tie, and sat beside them. The marble was cold against his knees, but Eli's laughter warmed the space. "Color?" Maya asked, handing him a blue block. Julian cleared his throat. "Blue," he said. Eli echoed faintly, almost soundless. "Boo." Julian froze. Maya's face softened. "You see?" she whispered. "He listens." In that small moment, surrounded by plastic blocks and morning light, something shifted in Julian Hartwell. Not a grand revelation, but a quiet unlearning. He realized the house hadn't been silent all this time because it was peaceful. It was silent because no one had known how to listen. And now, at last, someone did. By the end of the week, the mansion no longer sounded like a museum. The rhythm of life had softened, the silence no longer sharp. In place of the usual clipped orders and careful footsteps, there was laughter now. Quiet, hesitant, but unmistakable. Maya moved through the halls with her cleaning cart as usual, yet her tasks had shifted. The polished tables and dusted vases still mattered, but not as much as the boy who waited for her on the second floor. Eli had begun to expect her at certain hours, small, precise moments that gave him comfort. At 9 each morning, she appeared by his doorway, humming the same gentle tune. At noon, they built block towers together in the sunroom, always in the same order. Red, yellow, green, blue. Routine wasn't just habit, it was safety. The pattern gave Eli something to hold on to, and Maya understood that better than anyone. Julian often watched from a distance, pretending to check emails, though his phone remained dark in his hand. He was learning too, to stay present without interfering. When Maya taught Eli a new signal, Julian practiced in secret, copying the movements with clumsy precision. It was strange, this new language of quiet, where meaning lived in gestures instead of words. That afternoon, Maya introduced a set of emotion cards she had made from old index paper. Each card had a simple drawing, a smile, a frown, a tear, a hand over a heart. She laid them on the rug in a circle. "All right, Eli," she said softly. "Today we're learning faces." Eli tilted his head, studying them as if they were puzzle pieces. His small fingers hovered over the one with a big round smile. He tapped it once, then looked up. "Happy," Maya said gently, pressing her palm to her chest in the same motion she'd used that first night. Slow circle, then tap. "Safe here. Happy." Eli imitated the gesture. Though his movements were awkward, uncertain, still, Maya smiled. "That's right. Good job, baby." Across the room, Julian whispered to himself, following her signs. Happy, safe here. Eli noticed him, and for the first time didn't retreat. He simply looked at his father, curious, open. Then he did something unexpected. He lifted the happy card and placed it on the carpet between them. Julian froze. His throat tightened. It was the smallest offering, but it felt enormous. Maya didn't speak. She simply let the silence fill the space, because silence, to Eli, wasn't absence. It was understanding. When the session ended, Julian met Maya in the kitchen. She was rinsing paintbrushes and humming under her breath. "You made those cards yourself," he said. She nodded. "They work better when the child sees your hand in them. It's like showing him you made this world for him, not for everyone else." He leaned against the counter. "You make it sound simple." She smiled faintly. "It's simple, just not easy." Julian chuckled softly, a sound Maya had never heard from him. "You have a way of saying things that makes me question everything I thought I knew." "Maybe that's not a bad thing," she said, setting the brushes to dry. Later that evening, the three of them shared dinner in the family dining room, a space that had rarely hosted laughter since Evelyn's passing. Eli ate quietly, methodically. Maya kept her tone gentle, narrating small actions like a guide leading them through a world built of calm. "Eli is chewing," she said softly, smiling at him. "Eli likes potatoes." Julian caught on, adding, "Eli likes carrots too." His tone was cautious, testing. Eli looked up, blinking, then nodded once. It was a moment so brief that most people would have missed it. But for Julian, it felt like the first handshake between father and son. After dinner, Maya stayed to tidy up. Julian walked her to the door, something he never did for staff. "Do you ever rest?" he asked. "I do," she replied with a small smile. "Just not when I'm needed." He studied her expression. "What made you start working with children?" Her eyes softened with memory. "My brother. He was like Eli, nonverbal, sensitive to sound. People thought he was broken. He wasn't. He just needed the world to slow down." "Is he?" Julian stopped himself, uncertain if he should ask. "He passed," Maya said simply. "A long time ago. But he taught me that silence can be louder than words if you know how to listen." Julian said nothing for a moment. Then quietly, "Thank you for sharing that." She shrugged. "It's not a sad story, Mr. Hartwell. It's just one that made me who I am." That night, Julian didn't open his laptop. Instead, he sat in the hallway outside Eli's room, listening to the faint hum of Maya's tune replaying in his mind. He thought about his wife, Evelyn, and how she used to hum too when the house was still alive with music and laughter. He whispered into the quiet. He said, "Happy today." Saying it out loud made it real. Downstairs, Maya finished her final task of the night, turning off the last light in the living room. As the house dimmed, she glanced toward the grand piano that hadn't been played in years. Dust coated its surface, but the keys still gleamed faintly under the faint moonlight. She pressed one key softly. The note lingered in the air, low, warm, almost like a heartbeat. She smiled. "Every child has a rhythm," she murmured to herself, "and every house learns to follow." The next morning, Julian found a small drawing left on his desk, Eli's rough sketch of 3 circles, one small, one medium, one large. Beneath it, in shaky handwriting, the word "safe." He stared at it for a long time. There were no instructions for moments like this. No manual, no corporate strategy, no equation that could explain the feeling of being needed again. He placed the drawing in a frame, right beside his late wife's photograph. Two anchors on one desk, one memory of what he had lost, and one proof of what he could still build. That evening, when Maya returned, Julian met her at the door instead of waiting for her to appear upstairs. "He drew something for me," he said, his voice quiet, full of disbelief. "He wrote the word safe." Maya smiled, not surprised. "Then he knows you're trying." She looked at him for a moment, then added gently, "Don't rush to be perfect, Mr. Hartwell. Just be there. That's what he's really asking for." Julian nodded slowly. "You really believe that?" "I don't just believe it," Maya said softly. "I've seen it." As she climbed the stairs to check on Eli, Julian stood at the bottom, staring after her. For years, he had led teams of hundreds, negotiated mergers worth billions, commanded every room he entered. But here, in his own home, the only thing that mattered was the quiet sound of his son's laughter floating down the staircase. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was the sound of life returning, one small breath at a time. The calendar turned quietly, the way time often passes in houses where healing begins without ceremony. Weeks slipped by, and the Hartwell mansion found a new rhythm. Not the sharp click of heels on marble or the echo of business calls, but the steady pulse of small human sounds. The shuffle of a child's socks on the hallway rug, the hum of a song that had no words, the whisper of breath when the world finally calmed. Maya Ellison had changed more than the mood of the house. She had changed its language. Every morning, she and Eli followed the same ritual. At exactly 8:30, she appeared at his doorway holding a little basket of colored objects, soft fabric squares, wooden blocks, and a small chime that rang with a low, gentle note. She never started with words. Instead, she began with rhythm. One chime, then another, letting the sound fade before she looked toward him and signed, "Good morning." Her fingers traced it slowly in the air, a soft curve, a quiet opening. Eli, sitting cross-legged on the carpet, would tap the floor twice, his version of a reply. Across the hall, Julian Hartwell watched from the open door of his study. He no longer tried to hide it. Maya knew he was there. It had become part of the routine, too. The father hovering, learning the language he'd never known he needed. That morning, Maya introduced something new. From her basket, she took out the safe card Eli had drawn himself days earlier, the one with the small blue circle that meant peace. She placed it beside two new cards, one yellow for tired and one green for happy. "Today," she whispered, "we practice feelings." Eli's eyes followed her hand. His expression was serious, but his breathing stayed even, a small victory. Maya picked up the safe card and pressed it lightly to her chest. "Safe here," she said softly, showing the sign, a palm over the heart. Slow circle, gentle tap. Then she placed it on the floor. Eli leaned forward and copied the gesture. His hand was small, his motion uneven, but deliberate. He placed his card carefully next to hers. Julian exhaled, realizing he'd been holding his breath. Next, Maya lifted the green card. "Happy," she said, smiling without forcing it. "When we laugh, when we play." She made the sign for joy, her fingertips brushing upward like lifting light. Eli tried, his movement awkward but eager. Then he looked toward the doorway, toward his father. Julian stepped closer, uncertain whether he should speak. Maya nodded for him to join. Julian crouched beside them, the polished floor cold beneath his knees. "Happy," he said, copying the gesture. It looked a bit like he was flicking away dust. Maya covered her mouth, trying not to laugh. but a small chuckle escaped anyway, quick and bright, like sunlight bouncing off water. He looked at her, half offended, half amused. "What? Did I do it wrong?" "Completely," she said, her eyes sparkling. "But you tried. That's what matters." It was the first time Julian had heard her laugh. It startled him, not the sound itself, but what it did to the room. It softened everything. Even Eli noticed. His lips curled in something that almost looked like a smile. Later that evening, when the house had gone quiet, Julian sat in his study again. The blue glow of the screen lit the papers scattered across his desk. Reports, contracts, meetings he hadn't attended. Instead, his browser was open to a video titled, "Understanding Nonverbal Communication in Children." The instructor on screen demonstrated signs slowly. Julian imitated each one, fumbling. When he got one right, he looked at the photograph of Eli and whispered, "We'll get there." Behind him, the safe card lay framed on the corner of his desk. He'd placed it there earlier that day, a silent promise to his son. At 10:30, he heard footsteps in the corridor. Maya appeared in the doorway, holding a stack of neatly folded towels. She hesitated when she saw him copying hand movements in the dark. "Learning new tricks?" she teased softly. "Trying to keep up," he said, smiling. "How do you remember all these signs?" "I don't memorize them," she said. "I feel them. Each one connects to breath. If you breathe wrong, it feels wrong." He looked at his own hands, clumsy and unsure. "So it's not just what you do, it's how you move through it." "Exactly," she said, setting the towels down. "Children read movement better than words. They know when you mean it." Julian nodded, thoughtful. "In my world, meaning usually lives in numbers. Profits, shares, targets. It's strange." He paused, searching for the right words. "To realize there's a whole language I never learned, and it was right in front of me." Maya leaned against the doorframe. "It's never too late to learn a kinder one." She left him there with that sentence echoing in the room long after her footsteps faded. The next morning, Julian woke before dawn. The city skyline outside his window glowed faintly, the color of steel warming toward gold. He walked down the hall to check on Eli. The boy was still asleep, his small body curled beneath a soft blanket. On the nightstand lay something new, the safe card. It wasn't supposed to be there. He looked closer. Beneath the card was a small folded note written in crayon, a rough circle and two stick figures holding hands. Julian smiled, realizing Eli must have placed the card there himself before falling asleep, as if to remind the world that the day had ended gently. When Maya arrived later that morning, she noticed it immediately. "He moved it," she whispered. Julian nodded, left it on the table beside him. "Do you think he understands what it means?" She looked at the card, then at Julian. "He understands more than we think. He's showing you that what feels safe to him now includes you." Julian stood very still. The sentence landed quietly, heavy with meaning. After breakfast, Eli ran down the hallway with a toy truck in his hands, humming the same pattern Maya always used. 2 short notes, 1 long. Maya smiled. That's his way of saying he's ready. "Ready for what?" Julian asked. "For the day," she replied simply. "For the world." As they moved into the playroom, Julian noticed how every object in the space had changed meaning under Maya's touch. The blocks were no longer toys. They were conversations. The cards were not lessons. They were invitations. Even silence had become a kind of language. He joined them again that afternoon. This time, when he made the sign for happy, his motion was smoother. Maya nodded approvingly. Eli giggled. Julian looked at both of them, the woman who had walked into his son's storm and the boy who had finally found calm, and thought, this feels like progress. That night, before turning in, he wrote a note to himself in his planner. Not a business goal, just 5 words in his own handwriting. Listen more. Speak less. Stay. He left the light on low, the way Maya always did, and for the first time in years, the mansion slept without fear. The hum of machines faded, replaced by the faint rhythm of breathing. One grown man and one small boy learning the same quiet language. Outside, the wind carried the scent of the garden through an open window. Somewhere in the house, a chime rang once, clear and soft, like the echo of a promise that things were changing. Slowly, gently, exactly as they should. The morning began with the kind of silence that doesn't come from peace, but from memory. It was the 12th of April, Evelyn Hartwell's birthday. No one had mentioned it aloud, but the air in the house carried the weight of that date the way old walls carry the scent of rain. Even Eli seemed more restless, pacing in circles before breakfast, humming a low tune that didn't quite settle. Julian stood in his office, staring at the framed photograph on his desk. It was of Evelyn holding a newborn Eli, her smile soft and certain. She had been the heart of the home once, the warmth that filled every cold space he built. When she passed away, everything else had stayed, but the warmth had gone with her. He had buried his grief in meetings, travel, and silence. But grief doesn't stay buried. It only waits for its name to be spoken again. And today, without meaning to, he had spoken it the moment he looked at the date on his calendar. Downstairs, Maya noticed the tension too. The staff moved quietly, avoiding eye contact. Even the piano in the corner seemed to hold its breath. She asked one of the attendants in a whisper, "Why is everyone so quiet today?" The woman hesitated. "It's her birthday," she said softly. "Mrs. Hartwell." Maya nodded slowly, understanding. She looked up the staircase toward Julian's closed office door. The atmosphere felt like a storm that refused to break. Heavy, waiting. Later that afternoon, Maya found Eli sitting by the large window in the sunroom, staring at the gray sky. He had lined up his toy cars by color but wasn't playing with them. His little hands fidgeted, his gaze distant. "You feel it too, don't you?" she murmured, kneeling beside him. He didn't answer, but she didn't expect him to. Sometimes the air remembers things before we do. Eli's fingers tapped twice on the floor, a signal she had learned to recognize. He was asking if she was okay. "I'm all right," she said with a smile, "but I think your daddy needs a little light today." That evening, when Julian came down for dinner, the dining room was dim. The long table was bare except for a single candle standing in the center. Its flame flickered softly, catching on the crystal edges of the chandelier above. Maya stood at the far end, hands clasped. "What's this?" he asked, his voice careful. Maya looked at him with quiet respect. "It's her birthday, isn't it?" Julian hesitated, then nodded. "It is." "Then we should let the house remember her properly," she said. "Light tells the heart it hasn't forgotten." He stared at the candle, unsure what to say. No one had dared mention Evelyn's name for years, not even him. Eli sat between them, his gaze fixed on the flame. Maya kneeled beside him and whispered, "This is Mommy's light. We keep it burning for her. You can help if you want." Eli looked from Maya to Julian, then back at the candle. His lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. Instead, he reached out and touched the table near the candle's base, then drew his hand back quickly, as though afraid to disturb the memory. Julian watched the tiny gesture, reverence without instruction, and something inside him cracked. He walked closer, pulling out a chair. "Evelyn loved candles," he said quietly. "She used to light one every morning, even when the sun was already shining. She said the flame reminded her that light doesn't compete, it shares." Maya smiled faintly. "That sounds like her." Julian blinked, surprised. "You never met her?" "No," she said. "But Eli carries her peace. You can feel it." They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the soft hiss of the candle. Then Maya handed Julian a second match. "Would you like to light one too?" He hesitated, then struck the match. The flame flared and steadied. He lit a second candle and placed it beside the first. The two flames leaned toward each other in the still air, burning side by side. Maya whispered, "Now it's a light for her, and a light for the ones who remember." Julian looked at his son, who was watching intently. "Eli," he said softly, "can you help me with the last one?" He guided Eli's hand gently to the matchbox, letting the boy feel the texture of wood and cardboard. Together they struck a match, the sound small but sharp. Eli flinched at the spark, then watched in awe as the flame steadied. Julian helped him lower it to the third candle. When it caught, Eli's face glowed orange and gold. He looked up at his father, eyes wide, and blew softly, not to extinguish the flame, but to watch it dance. The three candles flickered together, one for the woman who was gone, one for the man learning to stay, and one for the child discovering warmth in a world that had once been too loud. Maya didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The moment belonged to them. After dinner, Eli grew sleepy and curled up on the sofa beside his father. Julian brushed the boy's hair back gently, something he hadn't done in years. The gesture felt both foreign and familiar, like a song half remembered. Maya began to tidy up, but Julian stopped her. "Leave them," he said softly, nodding to the candles. "Let them burn out on their own." She nodded. "Of course." He sat there long after the others had gone to bed, watching the flames shrink slowly. When the last one flickered out, he whispered into the darkness, "Happy birthday, Eve." The words were quiet, fragile, but they filled the space the way light had filled it before. Upstairs, in her small room near the servants' wing, Maya opened her journal and wrote a few lines before turning in. Grief doesn't leave when we ignore it. It just waits for the moment when love is brave enough to open the door again. She closed the notebook and blew out her lamp. Down the hall, faintly, came the sound of Eli humming, soft and low, like a lullaby passed from one heart to another. For the first time in years, the mansion did not feel haunted. It felt alive. Morning came softly, the way sunlight sometimes creeps into a house before anyone is ready to wake up. The sky outside the Hartwell mansion was pale gold, the kind of light that makes everything look newly washed. The garden shimmered with dew. Birds sang in cautious bursts, as if testing whether the world was listening. Maya Ellison stood near the open window of the breakfast room, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She had been awake for hours, as she usually was. Habit had trained her to rise before the house did, to let stillness settle in before people filled it again. Today, that stillness felt gentler. Yesterday's candlelight had done something to the air. It felt lighter now, as though grief had exhaled after holding its breath for years. Down the hall, she heard the quiet sound of small feet. Eli's. His rhythm was easy to recognize now, a steady pattern that matched the flow of her own breathing. He appeared at the doorway, still in his pajamas, clutching a small wooden toy in his hand. "Morning, sweetheart," Maya whispered. "You're up early." He nodded once, eyes half open, then pointed toward the garden. The morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows, pooling at his feet like a path made of light. "You want to go outside?" Another small nod. Maya smiled. "All right then, let's get our shoes." They stepped into the garden together. The air was cool, full of damp earth and the faint scent of lilacs. Bees drifted lazily over the roses. The world moved in slow motion, every sound softer, every color clearer. Eli stopped near a patch of wildflowers by the fence. He crouched down, touching a petal between his fingers. Maya knelt beside him. "That one's called a daisy," she said. "See how it opens wide when the sun comes up? It's saying good morning to the light." He looked up at her, his dark eyes wide. For a long moment, he just watched her lips move. Then softly, a sound escaped his mouth, barely more than a breath. "Duh." Maya froze. The sound was so faint that the wind could have swallowed it. She turned to him, hardly daring to believe. "What did you say, baby?" Eli blinked, his face calm, unbothered by her surprise. He touched the daisy again, then looked toward the house. She waited. The air felt sacred, fragile. He whispered again, clearer this time. "Duh." Her breath caught. She didn't move, afraid that even shifting the air might scare the word away. It wasn't a full word, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. The first bridge built from his silence to the world. When Julian stepped into the garden moments later, drawn by instinct more than sound, he saw them. Maya kneeling in the grass, eyes wide with something like awe, and Eli standing beside her, hand resting on the daisy patch. Maya turned to him, her voice trembling but soft. He said something. Julian blinked. "What?" He said "duh" twice. Julian's heart seemed to stop. He crouched down slowly, meeting his son's gaze. "Eli," he whispered, his voice breaking. Was that me?" Eli tilted his head, watching him. Then, almost casually, he repeated it. "Duh." Julian's breath left him in a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. He reached out, but stopped short, remembering Maya's rule, no sudden touch. So he waited. Eli, still watching, took one small step forward and pressed his tiny palm against his father's knee. Julian's vision blurred, the world tilted. He lowered his head, eyes closed, and for the first time in 6 years, let himself cry in front of his son. Maya stayed a step behind, silent. Her hands trembled around the hem of her apron. This was not her victory. It was theirs. She simply witnessed it, like someone standing quietly at the edge of a miracle. Julian looked up finally, tears still clinging to his lashes. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. Maya shook her head. "Don't thank me. That word wasn't for me." Later that morning, when the house began to stir, Maya sat at the small kitchen table with her journal open. The pages were filled with notes, dates, new signs Eli had learned, sketches of small moments. Today, she wrote something different. He didn't say "Dada" to me. He said it to love, and love answered. She closed the book, pressing her hand over it as if to seal the memory inside. Julian came in quietly. "He's asleep," he said, tired himself out from saying the same sound again and again. Maya smiled. "He's discovering his own music." Julian leaned against the counter, still dazed. You know, in business, we talk about progress in numbers, reports, metrics, but I can't measure what happened out there. Not everything that matters can be counted, she said gently. He looked at her for a long time, as if seeing her differently now, not as an employee, but as a mirror reflecting everything he'd forgotten to feel. I used to think love meant doing everything right, he said. Turns out it's just showing up when it's wrong. Maya met his gaze. That's the only kind that lasts. That afternoon, they returned to the garden together. Eli was awake again, calmer now, tapping his toy truck against the grass rhythmically. The sunlight played in his hair. Julian sat beside him, humming the tune he'd heard Maya use so many times. Eli listened for a moment, then echoed the hum, matching the pitch exactly. Julian froze, then looked toward Maya. Did you hear that? She nodded. He's harmonizing. That's how some children begin to talk. They match sound before words. Julian smiled through tears that wouldn't quite stay away. Then we'll make a song of it. Maya knelt beside them, joining the hum. 3 voices, one deep, one light, one small, blended under the open sky. No melody, no perfection, just harmony born of presence. When the sun began to set, the family stayed there, the grass cool beneath them, the world painted gold and lavender. Eli's head rested against his father's shoulder. Julian looked down, then across at Maya, and whispered, "He said my name." She smiled. "He said love's name. It just happened to sound like yours." That night, before closing his eyes, Julian wrote a single sentence in his phone's notes app. It read, "Today my son spoke, and somehow, so did I." He placed the phone down and looked out the window. The moonlight touched the framed safe card on his desk, the same one Eli had once given him. Beside it, Maya had left something new before leaving for the night. A tiny pressed daisy between 2 sheets of paper. Beneath it, a handwritten note. The flower opens because it trusts the sun. That's all we're teaching him. Julian smiled, exhaled, and whispered into the quiet, "Good night, little one." Somewhere down the hall, a child's voice, soft and sleepy, echoed back just one sound. "Duh." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of hope, of breath, of a family learning how to speak again. 2 weeks after the day in the garden, the Hartwell mansion buzzed with a different kind of preparation. The staff moved briskly, decorators hung silver, chandeliers over the ballroom, and the air filled with the faint scent of roses and expectation. Tonight was the annual Hartwell Foundation Charity Gala, a tradition Evelyn had begun years ago to raise funds for children's education. Julian had canceled it the past 2 years, but this time he decided to hold it again. He told himself it was for the foundation's sake, for optics, for the board. But deep down, he knew the real reason. He wanted to honor the woman who had believed that love could change the shape of a life. And though he hadn't said it aloud, he wanted to show Eli the world again, to test whether the small island of calm they'd built could withstand the noise outside it. Maya stood in the dressing room that afternoon, smoothing out Eli's tiny suit jacket. He looked sharp but uncomfortable, tugging at the sleeves with mild irritation. She crouched to meet his eyes. "It's all right," she said softly. "If it feels too tight, we can take it off later. Just breathe, okay?" He nodded, his hands tracing slow circles in the air, a rhythm she recognized. He was grounding himself, remembering the safe sign. Julian appeared in the doorway, wearing a tailored black suit. For a moment, he didn't look like a CEO or a father. just a man trying to hold two worlds together. "You both look perfect," he said. Maya smiled faintly. "We'll see how long that lasts." The ballroom glittered with wealth that evening. Every corner sparkled. Crystal glasses, marble floors, silver cutlery reflecting the light of dozens of cameras. People spoke in polished tones about stocks and politics, but underneath, the air hummed with quiet judgment. Julian greeted guests, shaking hands, smiling the kind of smile that photographs well, but feels like a mask. Eli stayed near Maya, holding her hand loosely. She had explained to him beforehand that there would be noise, bright lights, and too many people. "If it gets too much," she'd said, "just touch my sleeve. We'll find quiet together." For a while, things went smoothly. Eli watched the lights with fascination, occasionally hiding his face when applause echoed too loudly. Maya guided him through small breathing exercises, invisible to most of the crowd. Then came Clara Lark, elegant, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who always made rooms tilt slightly when she entered. Her husband owned Lark Tech, one of Hartwell Industries' fiercest competitors. Tonight, she floated across the floor in a silver gown that caught every flash of the camera. When she saw Maya standing beside Julian's son, her painted smile froze for half a beat, just long enough for her real thoughts to show. Then the smile returned, colder. "Oh," she said, voice sweet as champagne. "I didn't realize the staff were part of the family presentations now." Julian's hand tightened around his glass. "Ms. Lark," he said evenly. "This is Maya Ellison. She's part of Eli's care team." Clara's brows lifted. "Care team? That's new. Quite the promotion for a housekeeper." Maya felt the sting, but she didn't move. She'd been through worse kinds of silence before, the kind that hides behind polite laughter. "I see," Clara continued. "Well, one must be careful these days. Children pick up interesting attachments." Julian's jaw tightened. Eli's attachment has saved his life more than once. Clara's smile thinned. "How touching." She turned to a nearby couple, lowering her voice just enough to make sure it was still heard. "It's remarkable what some people will do to secure their place in a wealthy household. Wouldn't you agree?" The words slid through the air like thin blades. A few guests glanced their way, curious, judgmental. Maya kept her expression still. Eli pressed closer to her side, his breathing quickening. Julian noticed immediately. "Eli," he said softly, "would you like to go sit down?" But the boy's eyes were darting around now, lights flashing, voices rising, laughter too sharp. The sound of cutlery clinking became thunder in his ears. Maya knelt quickly, her hand hovering near his shoulder. "Eli, look at me," she whispered. "Breathe with me." She placed a hand over her heart, slow circle, gentle tap. "Safe here." He tried, but the crowd was closing in. A sea of perfume and questions. Someone snapped a photo, the flash exploding like lightning. Eli whimpered, covering his ears. Without hesitation, Maya gathered him in her arms, holding him close. "It's all right, sweetheart," she murmured. "You're safe. Just breathe." The room fell silent. The music stopped mid-note. Every eye turned toward them, the billionaire's son trembling in the arms of his maid. Clara Lark stood frozen, her expression faltering. The whispers began almost instantly, too quiet to quote, but loud enough to sting. Julian moved fast, stepping beside Maya. "That's enough," he said sharply to the onlookers. "He's a child, not a spectacle." He looked at Maya. "Let's take him upstairs." She nodded. Together they left the ballroom, the glittering room parting before them like a tide of judgment. Upstairs, the lights were dim. Maya sat on the floor beside Eli's bed, humming softly. His breathing steadied, his small hand still clutching her sleeve. Julian stood by the doorway, loosening his tie, the fury in him quiet, but alive. "I shouldn't have brought him here," he said under his breath. Maya shook her head. "You gave him a chance to see the world. That matters." He looked at her, guilt clouding his expression. "They humiliated you. They humiliated themselves," she said simply. "I just did my job." Julian leaned against the wall, exhaustion softening his voice. "You didn't just do your job. You reminded me what grace looks like." Maya smiled faintly, brushing Eli's hair. "Grace is just what's left when pride falls quiet." For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the city below was faint, distant. In this quiet space, the noise of the ballroom felt like it belonged to another world, one Maya had never wanted to enter anyway. Julian watched her, realizing that while the world downstairs ran on power and perception, the one up here, the one she'd built with his son, ran on something entirely different. Downstairs, the dinner continued without them. Glasses clinked again, and laughter resumed, louder, forced, desperate to erase what had just happened. But whispers would travel faster than the music ever could. And by morning, the story would have already left the ballroom. For now, though, in the dim light of the nursery, Maya stayed beside Eli until he slept. Julian watched, knowing that tonight's calm would not last long. The world outside had seen too much, and it would not stay quiet for long. When she finally rose to leave, he said softly, "Thank you." Maya paused at the door, her voice low. "You don't have to thank me, Mr. Hartwell. Just be ready. The world doesn't like when love makes the powerful look small." She left, her footsteps light. Behind her, Julian stood in the silence she left behind, a silence that already carried the faint hum of the coming storm. By morning, the mansion felt heavier than it had in months. The curtains remained drawn, the staff moved quietly, and even the birds outside seemed to sing with hesitation. But the silence didn't last long. At 7:15 a.m., Julian Hartwell's phone began to vibrate. Once, then again, then nonstop. Messages poured in, one after another. Missed calls, emails, and notifications from news outlets that rarely mentioned his name without the word success attached. He reached for the device, his stomach tightening even before he unlocked it. The first headline glared back at him in bold letters. CEO's maid masquerades as nanny, child safety questioned at high society gala. Julian's breath caught. He scrolled down, and there it was. A photograph taken from last night, the image already everywhere. Maya holding Eli close in the middle of the ballroom, his face buried in her shoulder while Julian stood nearby, looking helpless. The caption twisted the scene into a scandal. Below, a familiar name appeared. Report by Trent Maddox, Global Business Daily. Julian clenched the phone until his knuckles turned white. He didn't even notice that his coffee had gone cold. By the time he reached his office, Marion Calloway, his chief of staff, was already waiting with a folder full of printed articles. "It's spreading fast," she said. "Every outlet has picked it up. Some are speculating about—" She hesitated. "About what?" Julian demanded. "About your relationship with Ms. Ellison." Julian stared at her. "She comforted my son. That's all." Marion sighed. "The photos don't look like that to people who want to believe the worst. Investors are calling." LarkTech's PR division is amplifying the story through anonymous feeds. At the mention of LarkTech, Julian's expression hardened. "Clara Lark," he said quietly. "Of course." Downstairs, Maya was wiping the kitchen counter when she noticed two of the junior staff whispering by the door, their phones glowing in their hands. She didn't have to ask what they were reading. She already knew. She straightened, her voice steady. "If you're going to talk about me, at least spell my name right." The two women blushed and slipped away, embarrassed. Maya continued her work as if nothing had happened, though her heart thudded faster. She wasn't afraid for herself. She was afraid for Eli. He was sensitive to tension. He'd feel it before anyone said a word. By mid-morning, Julian came downstairs, his expression unreadable. "Maya," he said softly, "can we talk?" She nodded and followed him to the study. He closed the door behind them. "There's been a story," he began. "I've seen it," she said simply. "I'm so sorry." She gave a faint, tired smile. "Don't be. The world will always find a way to turn kindness into suspicion when it doesn't fit their rules." Julian sat down heavily. "My board is already asking for a review. They're suggesting we suspend you until the investigation clears." "Then suspend me," she said calmly. He looked up sharply. "You'd just accept that?" "I'm not here for pride," she said. "I'm here for Eli. If staying quiet helps him, I can take the noise." Julian leaned forward. "You shouldn't have to." Maya met his gaze evenly. "Neither should he. But the world's not fair yet. You know that better than anyone." He pressed his palms together, trying to think. "I'll handle the board. You stay here. I'll make sure they know the truth." "You can't fight gossip with logic," she said gently. "But you can outlast it with grace." Julian looked at her, realizing she was calmer than he was. The one being attacked was teaching the billionaire how to breathe again. At noon, the mansion's front gate buzzed. A uniformed officer stood there, clipboard in hand. "Child Protective Services." The words sent a chill through Julian. The officer introduced herself as Carla Green, polite but firm. "We received a report concerning potential neglect and emotional instability within the household. I'm here to conduct a welfare check." Julian's voice stayed measured. "Of course. You'll find everything in order." Maya appeared behind him. "Officer, I can show you around. Eli's upstairs, but he's resting." Carla nodded. "I'd like to see his environment, if that's all right." They walked through the house together. The sunroom, the playroom, Eli's bedroom. Everything was spotless, but what caught the officer's attention wasn't the decor. It was the sense of calm. The toys were organized by color, the lights dimmed just enough, soft music playing in the background. Carla watched as Maya adjusted the blinds to keep sunlight from hitting Eli's eyes. "He's sensitive to glare?" she asked. "Yes," Maya said. "Bright light can overwhelm him. This helps." Eli stirred in his sleep, shifting slightly toward Maya's voice. The officer noticed. "Seems like he feels safe with you," Carla said quietly. Maya nodded. "That's all we've been working on." After an hour of observation, Carla closed her file. "From what I've seen, this child is cared for and loved. The complaint will likely be closed as unfounded." Julian exhaled for the first time all day. "Thank you." But Carla's tone softened further. "You should still prepare. Someone wanted this visit to happen. It won't stop here." When she left, Maya turned to Julian. "They're trying to make you doubt yourself." "I won't," he said. But his voice carried exhaustion. That evening, David Tran, Julian's lawyer, arrived with updates. The story originated from a burner account linked to a LarkTech IP address, he said. Clara's people planted it, probably to tarnish your image before the board's quarterly vote. Julian's expression darkened. Then we sue. David nodded. We'll build the case, but it'll take time. Defamation laws require proof of intent and measurable damage. I don't care how long it takes, Julian said. We'll clear her name. Maya stood in the doorway, listening. Don't fight for me, she said quietly. Fight for what's right. That's bigger than any of us. Her calmness made Julian pause. You talk like you've been through this before. I have, she said simply. Different faces, same story. People see what they want to see. The truth just takes longer to travel. He nodded slowly. Then we'll make sure it gets there. By nightfall, the sky outside turned gray again. In the kitchen, Maya brewed chamomile tea while Julian sat at the counter, shoulders heavy. The scent filled the air. Warm, grounding. She placed a cup in front of him. Drink. You can't protect anyone if you're running on fumes. He smiled weakly. You sound like my conscience. Maybe I'm just the voice you stopped listening to, she said, her tone gentle. He looked up, meeting her eyes. You've changed this house. She shook her head. I didn't change it. I just reminded it what love feels like. Upstairs, Eli stirred in his sleep again. From the baby monitor, a small sound drifted through. A soft hum, the same one Maya always used. Julian glanced at her, startled. She smiled faintly. He hums when he's dreaming now. That means he feels safe even when we're not there. Julian sat back, the noise of the day finally receding. He realized that while the world outside was busy, spinning lies, inside this house, truth had already found its own quiet rhythm. One breath, one song, one heartbeat at a time. But as the night deepened, a new email landed in his inbox. Subject line, upcoming feature, the woman behind the scandal. And just like that, he knew the storm had only begun. The next morning, the air felt colder than it should have been for spring. A quiet drizzle blurred the edges of the city skyline outside the Hartwell mansion, washing color from the day. Inside, the tension hung invisible but thick, like humidity before a storm. Julian had barely slept. He sat at the kitchen table, his tie loose, untouched coffee cooling in front of him. The night before, his lawyer's warning had echoed in his head long after midnight. They're trying to break your credibility before the board meeting. He'd thought he was used to scandal management. Stocks, politics, partnerships, he'd handled them all. But this was different. This time, the headlines weren't attacking his business. They were circling around his son. Maya entered quietly, holding a towel to dry her hair from the rain. She didn't ask if he'd slept. She didn't have to. His eyes told her enough. Eli's still asleep, she said softly. He hummed in his dreams again. Julian looked up. He's not going to understand what's happening, is he? Maya shook her head. He doesn't have to. What matters is that the air around him stays calm. He nodded, though his jaw stayed tense. Calm felt impossible. At 9 o'clock sharp, the front gate buzzed. When Marion checked the camera feed, she saw the familiar uniform, Child Protective Services. Again. This time with a second officer beside her. Julian felt a chill crawl up his spine. They were just here. I know, Marion said, frowning. But they said it's a follow-up inspection. Someone filed a second complaint overnight. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, gathering herself. We'll show them what they need to see. Officer Carla Green stepped in, her posture professional but not unkind. The rain glistened on her jacket. Mr. Hartwell, Ms. Ellison, I know we've met before and I appreciate your cooperation. Unfortunately, a new report requires us to verify a few details. Julian forced a steady tone. Of course. What's the nature of the complaint this time? Carla opened her folder. Alleged neglect through improper supervision. A claim that your son was exposed to distressing environments, specifically public events, without trained medical personnel present. Maya sighed quietly. The gala, Carla nodded. Seems so. Julian rubbed his forehead. He was with both of us. He had sensory tools, noise buffers, his safe cue cards. I know, Carla said gently. This is procedure, not accusation. But we do have to observe. They began their walk through the house again. Maya led them, through the same rooms as before, explaining routines, showing medication logs, mealtime records, sleep charts. She'd kept everything meticulous, color-coded, handwritten, organized by date. Carla flipped through the binder. You keep very thorough notes, Ms. Ellison. Maya gave a faint smile. Order helps him feel safe. And when he feels safe, the house does too. They entered the sunroom next, where Eli was playing quietly with blocks. The morning light filtered through rain-slick windows, soft and gray. He didn't look up at first, focused on stacking each piece with deliberate care. Carla watched silently. He seems calm, she said. He likes the rain, Maya explained. The sound helps him focus. Eli placed the final block on his tower, then glanced up. When he saw Maya, he smiled, small but real. Then he picked up his safe card and held it out toward her. Carla observed the exchange, then nodded approvingly. He's communicating trust. That's good. Julian exhaled softly. But just as the tension began to ease, the second officer, a younger man named Fields, interrupted. Sir, if I may, he said, pulling a printed photo from his folder. We were asked to verify this image. It's circulating online. Julian took it. It was the same picture from the gala, Maya holding Eli, his small face pressed against her shoulder. But the caption had changed. Someone had edited it to read, Unlicensed caretaker interferes with child's therapy, billionaire father absent. Julian's expression hardened. That's a lie. I understand, Fields said carefully. But we need to confirm that Ms. Ellison's involvement has medical clearance. Carla gave him a look, not of accusation, but weary sympathy. Do you have documentation showing you're part of the child's support plan? Maya retrieved a folder from a nearby drawer. Here, she said. Inside was an updated letter from Eli's pediatric therapist approving her as a sensory care aide, dated 3 months earlier. Carla reviewed it, then closed the file. Everything seems in order. Fields nodded, embarrassed. Thank you, ma'am. Eli had been watching all of this quietly. He didn't understand the words, but he understood tone. His small hand reached for Maya's sleeve, tugging once, a sign that he needed reassurance. She knelt beside him. It's all right, baby. We're just talking. He looked at her, then at Julian, and signed safe here. One slow circle, one gentle tap. The room went still. Carla lowered her clipboard slightly, moved by the gesture. Children don't fake peace, she said. They either have it, or they don't. And this boy does. When the officers left an hour later, Carla paused at the door. For what it's worth, she said quietly, it's clear you both love him. But whoever's filing these reports isn't done trying to harm you. Document everything, and be careful. As the door closed behind them, Julian slumped against the wall, his composure finally cracking. How many more times are they going to do this? Maya set the binder down on the table. As many times as it takes for the truth to outlast the noise. He looked at her, exhausted, grateful. You don't flinch, do you? I can't, she said simply. If I break, he breaks. And I promised him the world wouldn't do that to him again. The rain outside had turned heavier, drumming against the glass like distant applause. That evening, Julian gathered the staff. He stood at the end of the dining table, where so many uncomfortable truths had been swallowed over the years. I know what's being said about this house, he told them. If anyone feels uncertain, you're free to speak. The staff shifted awkwardly, but no one did. Finally, Marion spoke. Sir, we've seen her with Eli. We know what's true. Julian nodded, relief flickering across his face. Then let's stand by it. Later, after everyone left, he found Maya in the hallway, gazing out at the rain. Do you ever get angry? He asked. She turned slightly, her reflection faint in the window. Of course I do. But anger is just noise. And Eli doesn't need more noise. He leaned beside her, staring at the wet city lights beyond the glass. I used to think silence was weakness, he said. Now I see it's what strength sounds like when it stops performing. Maya smiled softly. That's progress, Mr. Hartwell. They stood there for a long time, listening to the rain. Neither spoke again. In the background, the city buzzed with stories that twisted their truth. But here, in this quiet corner of the world, the only thing that mattered was a child sleeping soundly, untouched by the lies outside his window. Tomorrow the storm would return louder. But tonight, peace had found its way back, drop by drop, against the glass. The rain didn't stop the next day. It just shifted from steady drizzle to impatient bursts against the windows. The city felt restless, as if something bigger was about to break. Inside the Hartwell mansion, Julian sat at his desk, scrolling through endless reports from the company's legal department. None of them had anything to do with quarterly profits. Every headline still pointed to the same story, the Maid scandal. The news cycle had slowed, but it hadn't disappeared. The rumor had settled deep, like a stain you couldn't scrub out no matter how hard you tried. Maya, as usual, moved through the house quietly, refusing to let the outside noise touch Eli's routines. Every day still began with humming, color cards, and breakfast exactly the same way. Predictability was Eli's comfort, and in a strange way, it had become Julian's too. But even calm has limits. At 10 that morning, David Tran, the family's lawyer, arrived with a thin laptop bag and an expression that looked like both relief and caution. I found something, he said as soon as Julian met him in the study. Maya was there too, folding laundry on the couch by the window. She didn't look up, but she listened. David opened his laptop and turned the screen around. This is from your company's internal server logs. We traced the first post about Maya, the one that triggered the press cycle, to a specific network address. Julian leaned closer. LarkTech. David nodded slowly. A marketing manager named Nate Collier forwarded an image of the gala to a private group chat. Within 30 minutes, the same image appeared online under a fake journalist's account. Clara Lark's name isn't on it, but the digital trail goes straight back to her department. Julian's jaw clenched. So they planted it. Yes, David said. And then they leaked it to Trent Maddox for amplification. We have timestamps, metadata, everything. But to use it in court, we'll need to show motive. Why would they do it? Julian exhaled sharply. Because the board vote is next week. If my reputation takes a hit, The chair goes to her husband's company. It's strategic defamation. Maya set down the folded shirt in her hands. And they used your son to make it look believable. David nodded grimly. Exactly. That's where the line crossed from corporate rivalry into cruelty. Julian rubbed his temples. How fast can we move? We can file a countersuit within 48 hours, David said. Defamation, malicious interference, emotional distress. But we'll need evidence from inside Hartwell Industries. Internal emails, correspondence with Lark Tech, anything showing collusion. Marion, who had just stepped in with coffee, spoke up. If you give me clearance, I'll start pulling archived messages. We log everything. Julian looked at her gratefully. Do it. Quietly. The air in the room felt charged now, purpose replacing despair. But amid the tension, Maya stayed calm, folding another towel with deliberate care. She finally said, when you file the suit, make sure the story you tell isn't about revenge. Make it about truth. Julian looked at her. You really think people will listen to truth over scandal? They will, she said softly. If you make it human. People tire of hate faster than they admit. They just need to be reminded what decency looks like. David smiled faintly. You should join my firm. We could use that kind of clarity. Maya shook her head. No one listens to a voice that's trying to win. They listen to one that's trying to heal. The words stayed with Julian long after David left. That evening, he walked down the hall and paused outside Eli's room. Maya sat on the floor with the boy, helping him trace shapes in a coloring book. Every time he stayed inside the lines, she whispered, "Good job." Her voice steady, low, patient. Julian leaned on the doorframe. He's getting better. Maya looked up. He's getting braver. There's a difference. Julian smiled faintly. You always know exactly what to say. She shrugged. That's just because you're finally listening. A soft laugh escaped him. Touché. Later that night, while the house slept, Julian sat alone in his office reviewing old security archives. The glow from his laptop lit his face in blue and gray. The deeper he searched, the more he realized how easy it had been for small betrayals to hide inside polite systems, the kind that wore suits and smiled during meetings. At 1:27 a.m., he found it, an internal memo from a junior analyst at Lark Tech, sent weeks before the gala. Our timing depends on visibility. Targeting the Hartwell Foundation event will maximize press exposure. Julian stared at the words, fury rising like heat in his chest. He saved the file, labeling it simply proof. Then he closed the laptop, leaned back, and stared at the ceiling until the anger turned into something colder. Resolve. The next morning, when Maya came down for breakfast, he was already waiting, 2 cups of coffee on the table. She sat across from him. I found the message, he said. It's all there. They planned the smear before the gala even happened. Maya stirred her tea slowly. Then it's time to bring the truth into daylight. Julian nodded. David will file the suit today. You'll win, she said quietly. He looked at her, the question already in his eyes. And if we don't? Then at least you fought without becoming what they are. He studied her for a long moment. Do you ever get tired of believing the best in people? She smiled. Every day. And then someone like Eli reminds me why it's worth it. Just then, the little boy wandered into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He climbed into his chair without a word. Maya placed a plate of pancakes in front of him, shaped like a heart. Good morning, sunshine, she said. Eli blinked, then smiled, a small sound escaping his throat. Julian laughed softly. Was that approval? Maya nodded. Highest possible rating. For a moment, the world outside didn't exist. No headlines, no courtrooms, no noise. Just a father, a child, and a woman who had quietly rebuilt the meaning of safety. But as the clock ticked toward noon, Julian's phone buzzed again. A message from David. Filing submitted. Press will know within the hour. He looked up at Maya. It's begun. She didn't look afraid. Good, she said. Let them see what love looks like when it doesn't hide. That afternoon, the first new headline appeared, this time from a verified source. Hartwell Industries countersues Lark Tech for defamation. Internal evidence suggests premeditated smear campaign. Within minutes, social media turned. People shared the original photo again, this time with captions like, "Maybe the maid was the only one doing her job." Julian watched the comments scroll in real time. The tide was shifting, not fast, not loud, but steady. He turned to Maya, who was feeding Eli bits of apple. "You were right," he said quietly. "Truth travels slower, but it travels." She smiled. That's all it ever needed to do. Outside, the rain finally stopped. Sunlight slid across the wet pavement, turning every puddle into a small mirror. For the first time in days, the sky looked clean again. Julian leaned back, closing his eyes. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, it no longer felt like running from something. It felt like walking toward it, step by step, truth by truth. And in the next room, the faint sound of Eli's laughter carried through the house like music, the kind of melody that no rumor could ever drown out. The courthouse stood like a gray monument against the morning sky, its stone columns streaked with rain from the night before. Reporters clustered by the steps, their cameras wrapped in plastic, microphones bristling like a field of restless reeds. Every few seconds, a flash went off, cutting through the drizzle. Inside, the air was colder, the kind of chill that belonged to old buildings and older judgments. Rows of spectators filled the benches, executives in polished suits, journalists with bright eyes, and ordinary citizens drawn by curiosity. In the front row, Maya sat quietly beside Julian and David Tran, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a modest gray dress and no jewelry, her expression calm but alert. Eli wasn't in the courtroom yet. Julian's sister had taken him to the playroom nearby, waiting in case he became restless. But Maya still glanced toward the door every few minutes, as though she could feel the rhythm of his breathing even from across the building. The bailiff called for order. Judge Morrison, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, entered with the slow dignity of someone who'd seen too many versions of truth and lie to rush either one. The gavel struck once. Court is now in session. Case number 4182, Hartwell Industries versus Lark Technologies, concerning allegations of defamation, digital tampering, and professional misconduct. The murmur that followed was like wind rustling dry leaves. At the defense table sat Clara Lark, her posture flawless, her lipstick unbothered by the gravity of the morning. Her lawyers, dressed in tailored navy suits, whispered to her like chess players planning a quiet checkmate. David Tran stood first. "Your Honor, our position is simple. A false story was deliberately circulated suggesting that my client's employee, Ms. Maya Ellison, posed as a certified therapist to gain access to a vulnerable child. That lie endangered reputations and livelihoods, and it weaponized a child's condition for corporate gain." Clara's attorney rose, smoothly. "Your Honor, the defendant maintains that any information shared was already public knowledge. If inaccuracies occurred, they were unintentional." David's voice sharpened, though he kept it respectful. Unintentional? Then perhaps Ms. Lark can explain why her employee, Mr. Nate Collier, transmitted restricted photos from the Hartwell Gala to an anonymous press account. We have a digital trail, time-stamped, verified, and cross-referenced. Judge Morrison leaned forward. You're referring to what the documents call the chain of access? Yes, Your Honor, David said. In plain terms, it's the record of who opened, copied, and sent a file. Every click leaves a fingerprint, and those fingerprints all point back to Lark Tech. A low murmur rippled through the room. Clara's lawyer interjected quickly. We dispute the authenticity of that data. Anyone could have fabricated it. David gestured toward the screen where a chart appeared, showing a sequence of digital signatures. Then perhaps our independent cybersecurity expert can clarify. For the next 15 minutes, the court listened as the expert explained how every file on a server carried a unique trail of numbers, like a breadcrumb path that could not be erased. Each breadcrumb, he said, led to Lark Tech's internal system. When he finished, the courtroom was still. Judge Morrison nodded slowly. I understand. Please continue, Mr. Tran. David turned back toward the witness stand. Your Honor, I'd like to call Officer Carla Green. Carla walked up with the calm confidence of someone who had seen too many false alarms and one too many real ones. After taking the oath, she settled into the witness chair. Officer Green, David began, you visited the Hartwell residence twice during the investigation, correct? Yes, she said. Both times following anonymous complaints. Did you find any evidence of neglect or danger to the child? None whatsoever, she said. The child was in a safe environment. His emotional well-being was being managed with care and consistency. Ms. Ellison demonstrated exceptional understanding of his needs. David nodded. In your professional opinion, did the allegations you received have any factual basis? Carla shook her head. No, sir. In fact, it appeared to me that the complaints were an attempt to harass or intimidate the family. Across the courtroom, Clara's expression tightened. Julian exhaled quietly. For weeks, he had felt as if the ground might fall away at any moment. Now, for the first time, it began to hold. David turned toward the jury box. What you've heard today isn't just about one family. It's about how easy it is for truth to be buried beneath assumption. But even silence leaves evidence, if you know how to listen. Then came a brief recess. The gavel struck, and the crowd stirred like a field of restless whispers. Maya remained seated, her fingers tracing invisible circles against her skirt, her quiet version of prayer. The doors at the back opened slightly, and in a sudden movement that no one expected, a small figure slipped inside. Eli. He spotted her instantly, his eyes lighting up. Before anyone could stop him, he ran down the aisle, the sound of his little shoes echoing against the marble floor. Maya. It wasn't loud, but in the hush of the courtroom, it felt like thunder. Every head turned. Gasps filled the air. Eli reached her, throwing his small arms around her neck. She caught him instinctively, holding him close as he buried his face in her shoulder, just like the photo from the gala. But this time, there were no whispers, no flashbulbs, only the sound of a child finding comfort where he knew it lived. Julian's eyes stung. Even Judge Morrison paused, his gavel hovering mid-air before he quietly set it down. After a long, silent beat, he said gently, Mr. Tran, I believe we've all seen enough to understand the nature of this relationship. David bowed slightly. Yes, Your Honor. Maya whispered something into Eli's ear, just one soft word, and he nodded, releasing her hand reluctantly before Julian guided him back to the waiting room. When the court reconvened, the atmosphere had changed. The tension that had filled the space now felt replaced by something humbler, understanding. Judge Morrison cleared his throat. It's rare in this courtroom to see truth so clearly without speech or evidence, but sometimes the simplest gesture is enough. He looked directly at Maya. We'll resume testimony tomorrow morning. Court is adjourned for the day. The gavel struck once, but the sound didn't echo with finality. It rang like closure slowly taking shape. Outside, the media waited to twist whatever they could. But for those inside the room, no twist was necessary. They had already seen it. A child's instinct for love cutting through every lie adults had built. Julian walked beside Maya as they exited the courthouse through a side door. Neither spoke. The crowd noise faded behind them, replaced by the ordinary rhythm of city life. Cars passing, birds on telephone wires, the faint hum of traffic lights. Maya finally broke the silence. He shouldn't have been here. Julian shook his head. He needed to be. Everyone needed to see what real care looks like. She smiled faintly, though her eyes shone. Sometimes the quiet ones speak the loudest. He nodded, and the world finally listened. They walked on in silence, the sound of the gavel still echoing somewhere behind them, less like judgment and more like a promise that truth, at last, had begun to find its voice. The next morning, the courthouse was even more crowded. The first day had drawn curiosity. The second day brought conviction. People weren't just there to watch, they wanted to witness. Inside, the courtroom lights hummed, softly, illuminating the polished wooden benches. It smelled faintly of old paper and rain-soaked coats. Maya sat beside David Tran again, her gray dress replaced with a navy one that made her eyes look darker, calmer. Julian arrived a few minutes later with Eli's small, safe card tucked in his jacket pocket, a quiet talisman against fear. He nodded to her from across the room, a silent promise. You're not alone. When Judge Morrison entered, the room rose. His expression was unreadable, but his voice carried a gentleness that hadn't been there yesterday. Court is back in session. The defense may continue. Clara Lark's attorney stood. Your Honor, we maintain that Ms. Ellison misrepresented herself as a therapeutic specialist, creating confusion about her qualifications. David rose immediately. If it pleases the court, we'd like to invite Ms. Ellison to testify. Maya stood, her posture steady but humble, and made her way to the witness stand. Her shoes barely made a sound on the floor. When she sat down, she folded her hands neatly in her lap. The bailiff held out the oath card. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do, she said softly. David approached with a calm smile. Ms. Ellison, could you tell the court, in your own words, what you do for the Hartwell family? I clean their house, she said simply. I cook sometimes. I take care of the little things most people don't notice. But mostly, I try to make the house feel like it's breathing again. A faint ripple of whispers moved through the courtroom. David nodded. And how did you come to be involved in caring for Mr. Hartwell's son? I didn't come to care for him, she said. He came to trust me. That's different. David stepped closer. Can you explain what you mean by that? She looked at the jury, her voice steady but warm. Children like Eli don't open up because you tell them to. They open up because you stop asking them to. I didn't touch him or talk too much. I just sat there, quiet enough for him to find his own calm. The first time he fell asleep beside me, it wasn't a miracle. It was patience finally being answered. Julian's throat tightened. He saw a few jurors blink back tears. David nodded slowly. "Did you ever pretend to have credentials you didn't?" "No," Maya said. "I've never claimed to be a therapist. I only claim to care." Clara's attorney stood for cross-examination, his tone clipped but polite. "Ms. Ellison, are you saying you had no formal training?" "I read. I volunteered. I learned," she said evenly. "Some lessons don't come with certificates." The attorney tilted his head. "Yet you gave instructions to the household staff, introduced therapy-like routines, even used hand signals. Don't you think that could have misled people?" Maya paused before answering. "If showing kindness misleads someone," she said quietly, "then maybe we should ask what they expected to see instead." The courtroom went utterly silent. The attorney looked down, unsure what to say next. "No further questions," he muttered. David returned for redirect. "Ms. Ellison," he said gently, "if you could say one thing to the people who've judged you, what would it be?" She took a deep breath. "Care isn't charity," she said. "It's respect. It's seeing someone's pain and not turning away because it's uncomfortable. The quiet ones, children, workers, anyone whose voice doesn't carry, they teach us what listening really means. And if we can't listen, all the noise in the world won't make us right." The words hung in the air, soft but heavy. Even Judge Morrison leaned back, his expression thoughtful. For a long moment, no one moved. Then he nodded once. "Thank you, Ms. Ellison. You may step down." As Maya walked back to her seat, a woman in the second row, one of the reporters, set down her pen. She wasn't taking notes anymore. She was simply watching. David presented the final exhibits: proof of the leak, time-stamped logs, and Carla Green's signed testimony. When he finished, he spoke quietly to the jury. "We live in a world that measures success by volume. Who speaks the loudest, who wins the argument. But today, we've seen something different. We've seen that truth can whisper and still be heard." The defense tried one last argument, citing insufficient proof of direct intent. But the momentum had already shifted. Judge Morrison reviewed the documents for a long while, his pen tapping softly against the bench. Finally, he removed his glasses. "The evidence is clear," he said. "The defamatory material was deliberate. The harm to Ms. Ellison's reputation and to the Hartwell family was measurable and unjust." He glanced toward Maya, his tone softening. "This court acknowledges not just the facts, but the grace with which they were presented. Case dismissed with prejudice." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then it broke. Not in cheers, but in the sound of quiet relief. People exhaled. A few clapped softly. Julian turned to Maya. "It's over," he whispered. She smiled faintly. "No, it's just finished being unfair." As they left the courtroom, reporters called her name, cameras flashing. Maya didn't stop for interviews. She simply nodded politely, one hand resting over her heart, as if grounding herself again. Eli waited outside, holding a single daisy in his small hand. When he saw her, he ran forward and offered it to her without a word. She knelt to his level. "For me?" He nodded, smiling. Julian stood beside them, the crowd and cameras still swirling. "How does it feel to have your name cleared?" one journalist shouted. Maya looked up, her voice calm. "Names don't need clearing," she said. "Hearts do." The crowd quieted. Even the camera, shutters slowed, as though the story had already told itself. As they stepped into the sunlight, Maya took a deep breath. The air smelled like rain giving way to warmth. For the first time in weeks, the sky was clear. Julian looked at her, his expression soft. "You didn't just win, Maya. You changed how they see us." She shook her head. "I didn't change them. They just remembered what it means to be human." He smiled, glancing at Eli, who was now twirling the daisy like a small victory flag. "Then maybe that's the only kind of change that lasts." Maya nodded, still watching the flower spin in the child's hand. The quiet kind. They stood together for a moment longer. No speeches, no headlines, just a rare stillness that felt like the world itself had stopped to listen. The cameras caught it anyway. A woman, a man, and a child framed in sunlight outside a courthouse. No one smiled for show. No one posed. They simply existed, proof that sometimes dignity itself is the loudest truth of all. The courthouse emptied slowly, like the sea pulling back after a wave. The last echoes of applause dissolved into footsteps and whispers, leaving behind the soft hum of cameras shutting down. Outside, the sun hovered just above the city skyline, spilling light across the courthouse steps. Light that felt like forgiveness, or maybe just relief. Julian walked beside Maya, one hand gently guiding Eli through the crowd. Security officers tried to hold the press back, but microphones still darted forward, desperate to catch words that would make headlines. "Ms. Ellison, do you have a statement?" someone called. "What will you do next?" another shouted. "Are you and Mr. Hartwell working together now?" Maya didn't answer. Her eyes were on Eli, who clung to her hand, overwhelmed by the noise. She knelt beside him, pressing his palm to her heart. The familiar circle, the gentle tap. "Safe here," she whispered. Julian crouched next to them, shielding his son from the flashes. "Let's get him home." David Tran cleared a path toward the waiting car. As they moved through the crowd, a woman's voice rose above the chaos. "Ms. Ellison, thank you for what you said in there." Maya turned briefly. The woman held a small notebook and wore no press badge. She looked like an ordinary person, tired, maybe a single mother, her expression full of quiet gratitude. "My son has autism too," she said, her voice trembling. "People needed to hear you." Maya's eyes softened. She didn't speak, just nodded once, a silent acknowledgement between strangers who understood what most of the world still didn't. Inside the car, Eli pressed his face against the window, watching the flashes blur into streaks of light. He tapped the glass twice, his version of goodbye. Back at the mansion, the house felt different. It was the same marble, the same walls, but the air was lighter now, like a room after a storm when everything still smells of rain. The staff greeted them quietly, smiles this time, not whispers. Someone had even left a small bouquet of daisies on the kitchen counter. Maya placed them in a glass jar, trimming the stems with care. Julian watched her from the doorway. "You should rest," he said. She shook her head. "Rest comes later. The house needs to feel calm again first." He smiled faintly. "I think it already does." Eli was sitting on the floor, stacking his blocks again. Calm, focused. His lips moved in a soft hum, the tune familiar now. Maya knelt beside him and joined in, humming the same pattern. Julian listened from across the room. For the first time in months, he didn't feel like an outsider in his own home. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Julian stood on the terrace looking over the city. His reflection shimmered faintly in the glass doors. The skyline below glowed gold, and the sound of distant traffic felt like a lullaby instead of noise. Maya stepped outside, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "He's asleep," she said. "Already?" She nodded. "He fell asleep humming. That's how you know peace has returned." Julian turned toward her. "You know, when all this started, I thought I was fighting to protect my name. But watching you today, I realized I was fighting to remember what it means to deserve one." Maya smiled. "You've always deserved it. You just forgot why." For a long time, they stood side by side, neither speaking. The wind moved softly through the garden, carrying the faint scent of wet soil. Down in the city, the world was already rewriting the story. News outlets that had once questioned Maya's integrity were now calling her the voice of quiet courage. A new hashtag began trending online: safe silence. People shared clips of her courtroom testimony, quoting her words, "Care isn't charity, it's respect." Even Trent Maddox, the journalist who'd fueled the smear, issued a televised apology that night. His tone was careful, the words rehearsed, but sincere enough to matter. "Sometimes," he said, "a story teaches the reporter more than the audience." Clara Lark, meanwhile, resigned from her position at Lark Tech. Her public statement was short. "I made choices driven by ambition instead of empathy. I hope to learn from those I wronged." The irony wasn't lost on Julian, but he didn't gloat. He simply turned off the television and sat in the quiet, letting the noise of victory pass by. When Maya entered the room, she found him sitting at the grand piano, the same one that had gathered dust since Evelyn's death. He wasn't playing, just touching the keys like someone reacquainting themselves with memory. "She used to play," he said quietly. "Every evening, the house used to feel alive when she did." Maya stepped closer. "Then maybe it's time for the house to feel alive again." He looked up at her. "I don't know how." She smiled softly. "Start with one note. The rest will find you." Julian pressed a single key. The sound was faint, hesitant, but true. It hung in the air like a heartbeat. Then slowly, Maya joined him, pressing another key beside it. Harmony. They didn't play a song. They didn't need to. The two notes lingered together, blending into the kind of sound that only happens when people share silence without fear. After a while, Julian said, "I owe you more than I can repay." Maya shook her head. "You don't owe me. You just owe the world the same gentleness you found in this house." He looked at her then, really looked, and realized that she wasn't just part of the home's recovery. She was its proof. "You were never just staff," he said softly. "You were our anchor." Her eyes glistened. And anchors don't hold ships back. They just keep them from drifting too far when storms come. The room fell quiet again, the piano still humming from the last note. Outside, the city lights flickered like fireflies. Somewhere in the distance, a reporter's voice echoed faintly through an open window, reading the latest headline. "Truth wins. Hartwell case redefines compassion in corporate America." But inside the mansion, none of that mattered. The real victory wasn't on paper. It was the soft sound of a child sleeping peacefully upstairs, and the echo of two quiet notes still mingling in the air. As Maya turned to leave the room, Julian called after her, his tone gentle. "What happens now?" She paused at the doorway. "Now," she said, "we learn how to live when there's no storm left to fight." And with that, she disappeared down the hall, her footsteps steady, her silhouette framed by the last golden light of day. The piano key still vibrated softly, like a whisper that refused to fade, a promise that calm wasn't the end of the story. It was the reward for having believed in it long enough. 6 months passed. The city shifted from the gray hush of winter into the tender green of spring. The storms that once defined the Hartwell mansion had long since moved on, leaving sunlight that lingered instead of rushing away. The house no longer felt like a museum. The marble floors still shone, but laughter sometimes echoed against them now. The piano wasn't silent anymore. It hummed gently every evening, small songs that didn't try to be perfect. And in the garden, where weeds once choked the corners, new things were growing. On a soft April morning, Maya knelt beside a patch of freshly turned soil, her hands buried in the earth. The scent of rosemary and wet roots filled the air. Her sleeves were rolled up, and a streak of dirt ran across her cheek. But she didn't notice. Gardening was where her thoughts found quiet. She glanced up when she heard footsteps behind her. Julian was approaching, his usual crisp suit replaced by a rolled-up shirt and old jeans. He carried a small tree sapling, its roots wrapped in burlap. "I wasn't sure which one you wanted," he said, holding it up. "Elm or oak?" Maya smiled. "Elm. It bends with the wind but doesn't break. Good reminder." He chuckled softly. "You're still turning life into lessons." "Someone has to," she teased. They knelt together, clearing a space for the sapling. Julian pressed the soil around the roots with careful hands, the same way he'd learned to touch his son, gentle but certain. Eli was nearby with his new therapist, Dr. Janelle Brooks, a kind woman with warm eyes and a voice like sunlight through leaves. She sat at the small garden piano they'd placed under the awning, a child-sized keyboard with colorful stickers marking the notes. "Ready, Eli?" she asked. He nodded, his small fingers hovering over the keys. The first notes he played were hesitant, but they found each other like raindrops merging into puddles. Janelle joined in, humming softly, then stepped back to let him play alone. Maya paused her gardening to watch. "He's really doing it," she whispered. Julian smiled, brushing soil from his hands. "He practices every morning now, sometimes before breakfast." Eli finished the melody and looked up. When he saw Maya and his father watching, he signed music with a small movement of his hand, then pointed to the sky. "Music up?" Julian asked. Janelle laughed. "He means the music feels big, like it's going up." Maya's eyes softened. "Then it's working." They clapped quietly, not to celebrate, but to share the moment. Janelle guided Eli toward the watering can, showing him how to help feed the new tree. Together, they poured a stream of water over the roots, the sunlight catching tiny rainbows in each droplet. Julian watched them, the corners of his mouth lifting. "Do you realize," he said to Maya, "this is the first time he's ever watered something by himself?" "I noticed," she said gently. "He trusts what's alive now. That's a big step." Julian looked at her for a long moment, then at the garden around them. The roses she had planted months ago had finally begun to bloom, their petals soft as forgiveness. "You've turned this place into something I hardly recognize," he said. She smiled. That was the point. The morning unfolded quietly. Janelle finished her session and packed up her notes, promising to return next week. As she left, Eli ran back to the piano, pressing random keys just to hear the sound. Each note rose into the air and disappeared softly, like a secret the world was meant to overhear. Maya sat down beside him, tapping one of the keys. "You know," she said, "when your mother was alive, she used to say gardens are like hearts. They grow best after being broken open." Eli didn't understand all the words, but he watched her face and smiled. Then, carefully, he placed her hand on the keyboard and guided it to play with his. Julian stood behind them, the sunlight haloing the two figures, one teaching, one learning, both healing. After a while, Maya rose and brushed off her knees. "Come on," she said. "Let's have breakfast outside." They moved to the table under the pergola, where fresh fruit and tea waited. The air was full of sound: bees, piano keys, the soft laughter of a child. Julian poured her tea. "You know, I thought peace would feel like silence," he said. "But it sounds like this." Maya smiled over her cup. "Peace isn't quiet. It just doesn't argue." He laughed. "That's good. I should write that down." Eli tugged on his father's sleeve and pointed to the new tree. Julian followed his gaze. "Yes, that's ours. We planted it together." Eli touched his chest, then gestured toward Maya, then to the sky, his version of the word home. Maya's eyes shimmered. "He just said home." Julian's voice broke softly. "He did." For a moment, neither of them spoke. They watched as the boy wandered to the edge of the garden, his hand brushing along the petals of a rose, his small shadow stretching in the sunlight. Julian turned to Maya. "You once told me grace is what's left when pride falls quiet. I think I finally understand." She nodded. "It's what remains when the noise stops mattering." The morning breeze lifted the edge of the tablecloth. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed the hour, slow and mellow. Julian leaned back, eyes half closed. "Do you ever miss the city?" "No," she said. "This is where the noise became music." He smiled, tracing the rim of his cup. "Maybe we'll plant a new tree every time the world forgets what peace feels like." "Then you'll have a forest soon," she said. He laughed quietly. "That wouldn't be such a bad thing." The camera of the mind would have panned wide at that moment. The garden in soft focus, the new tree swaying gently, the house behind them glowing with reflected light. In the center of it all sat the three of them. A man learning how to be present, a woman who taught through stillness, and a child who'd turned silence into song. No grand speeches, no applause, just the slow, patient rhythm of a family relearning how to live. And above them, the elm's young leaves flickered in the breeze, whispering like the faintest applause from the earth itself. The months that followed unfolded like pages from a book that finally learned to breathe. The Hartwell mansion, once an echo chamber of footsteps and formality, had softened into something that felt alive. The air no longer carried the scent of dust and marble polish, but of toast, soap bubbles, and wet paint. Eli had discovered his voice, not in the way most children did, with chatter and endless questions, but through rhythm and touch. Every day, a new sound came from him. A hum, a syllable, a word that carried more feeling than speech ever could. Maya noticed the changes first. She began keeping a small notebook again, jotting simple sentences. Eli smiled when the cat brushed against him. Eli handed Julian a crayon instead of hiding. Eli said more when the song ended. Each line looked ordinary on paper, but to her, they were holy. Julian noticed too. Every evening, he left the office earlier, no longer trapped by the illusion that productivity was purpose. Some nights, he came home just to sit in the living room while Maya and Eli painted. He didn't interrupt. He just watched, quietly learning from the small, sacred routine of care. The walls, once decorated with oil portraits of ancestors and shareholders, now displayed Eli's art. Bright suns with crooked smiles, stick figures under rainbows, a house drawn in shaky lines, but unmistakably theirs. One afternoon, Maya entered the living room to find Julian sitting on the floor with Eli, building a block tower. The boy was humming a tune from one of his therapy sessions. Julian joined in off-key, laughing when Maya caught him. "You're learning his songs now?" she asked. He shrugged. "Better than reading board reports." She smiled, settling beside them. "He's teaching you rhythm. You've needed that." Julian grinned. "All this time I thought I was teaching him. Turns out he's teaching me." Eli placed the final block on the tower, then looked up at both of them. His lips moved, slow, deliberate. Lo-ve. Julian froze. "Did you just—" Maya nodded, her eyes wide with quiet joy. "He signed it yesterday, but he's never said it out loud." Julian's voice caught. "Say it again, buddy." Eli smiled shyly. "Love." Julian leaned forward, his hands trembling as he covered his son's small fingers with his own. "That's the best word I've ever heard." The moment was so simple, so soft, that it almost slipped past unnoticed. But Maya knew better. These were the miracles that held the world together. Tiny, steady, invisible to anyone who measured life by speed. Later that evening, Maya wrote in her journal, "It's not the big changes that save us. It's the quiet ones. The way a smile stays longer, a breath evens out, a child says love and means it with his whole being." The house continued to change, bit by bit. Julian's company, now rebuilt under the new motto, Human First, had begun offering flexible work for parents of neurodiverse children. He had turned policy into empathy, not because of a board vote, but because of a promise he'd made silently to himself. He'd even hired Maya as an internal consultant for inclusion, though she still insisted on starting her mornings in the kitchen, brewing tea and checking Eli's schedule before sitting in any meeting. "Titles don't make the world better," she told him once. "Routines do." Julian couldn't argue with that. Spring rolled into summer, and with it came color. The garden exploded with life. Roses in bloom, vines curling around the fences, and the small elm tree they had planted months ago now standing a little taller, its branches spread like arms, learning how to hold sunlight. Every Saturday morning, Maya and Eli watered it together. He counted the leaves aloud, sometimes losing track halfway and giggling. When Julian joined, he'd bring coffee for Maya and a small jar of honey for Eli's toast. Those mornings became ritual, steady as heartbeat, gentle as breathing. Fact: in developmental therapy, consistent routines provide emotional safety. Predictable patterns help neurodiverse children form stable connections, transforming ordinary tasks into emotional anchors. The Hartwell mornings had quietly become just that, a chain of safety made from repetition, not rules. One evening, thunder rolled across the horizon. The sky turned dark, heavy with clouds. Eli pressed close to Maya, his hands over his ears. She drew him near and whispered, "The storm is just the sky washing itself clean." Julian closed the windows, glancing back at them. The image stayed with him, the boy's head tucked against Maya's shoulder, her hand tracing slow circles over his back. It was the same motion she had used months ago, the same gesture that had first calmed his panic. He realized then that healing wasn't something that happened all at once. It was maintenance, the daily act of showing up. When the thunder faded, Eli peeked outside and pointed. A rainbow arched faintly over the city skyline. His small voice broke the hush. "Pretty," Julian smiled. "It is." "Safe," Eli added. Maya turned to him, her eyes soft. "Yes, safe." The three of them stood together by the window, the light from the rainbow reflecting in the glass. Three figures framed in color and quiet. Later that night, when Eli was asleep, Julian found Maya on the porch, her notebook open again. You still write everything down? He asked. She looked up, smiling. Some things need to be remembered twice. Once when they happen, and once when you write them. What did you write tonight? She turned the notebook toward him. On the page, in her neat handwriting, it said, "We planted a tree, and today it learned to hold rain." Julian read the lines slowly. "You're a poet, you know." "I'm just paying attention," she said. "That's all caring really is." He leaned against the railing beside her, the night breeze soft on their faces. "You've changed everything, Maya. Me, the company, this house." She shook her head. "No. You just stopped hurrying long enough to notice what was already waiting." The house lights behind them glowed warm, golden through the windows. The garden swayed gently in the dark. Inside, the sound of Eli's faint humming drifted down the hallway, mixing with the chirping of crickets. It was a lullaby no one had taught him, a melody born out of safety and sleep. Julian glanced toward the garden. "You know, when I used to picture success, I saw skyscrapers. Now all I see is that little tree." Maya smiled. "That's how you know you've grown." He nodded. "And you?" She closed her notebook. "I used to think my life was about keeping things clean. Turns out it was about helping them bloom." Neither spoke again. The quiet between them wasn't empty. It was full of everything that didn't need words. The wind moved through the elm, shaking loose a few drops from its leaves. They sparkled in the lamplight as they fell, like tiny blessings returning to the soil. Autumn arrived with the kind of sunlight that felt borrowed, warm but fleeting. The city outside the Hartwell building shimmered in bronze, its glass towers reflecting clouds that looked almost weightless. Inside, however, the air was heavier. The quarterly board meeting had begun. Suits filled the long walnut table. Pens clicked, papers rustled, and under the low hum of the projector, hearts beat a little faster than usual. Julian sat at the head of the table, not as a man defending himself this time, but as one who finally knew what his voice sounded like when it wasn't raised. Maya wasn't there in person. She preferred to stay out of boardrooms. But the morning had started, as always, with her quiet words at breakfast. "Don't try to prove anything today. Just make something true." He'd carried that with him like armor. To his right sat Marion Calloway, steady and sharp as always, flipping through the company's new draft policy. To his left, David Tran was present not as lawyer, but as advisor, watching with the calm of someone who'd seen reputations built and rebuilt. The topic on the screen read, Hartwell Industries, Inclusive Care Initiative. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian began, his voice measured, "our industry has always measured success in profit margins. But lately, I've come to realize there's a quieter kind of wealth, the kind that doesn't show up in quarterly reports. Today's proposal is simple: to recognize the humanity behind the productivity." A few eyebrows rose, but no one interrupted. He continued, "We're implementing comprehensive mental health leave for employees caring for neurodiverse children or family members. We'll expand flexible scheduling, create on-site therapy partnerships, and fund local awareness programs." An older board member, Mr. Alden, leaned forward. "And the projected cost of all this?" Julian met his gaze calmly. "Less than one lawsuit born of burnout, and infinitely less than losing a good person to exhaustion." A murmur rippled through the room. Alden frowned. "But where's the measurable return?" David spoke up, his tone even. "You'll see it in retention, in loyalty, in public trust. This isn't charity. It's sustainability." Marion turned another page. And it's already improving performance metrics in pilot departments. People who feel seen work better. Julian nodded. We're not changing direction. We're realigning our compass. The boardroom went quiet again. On the far wall, the morning sun slid through the blinds, drawing thin golden lines across the table. For a long time, no one spoke. Then, from the far end of the table, a woman's voice broke the silence. "Mr. Hartwell," said Elena Cho, one of the newer directors, "this feels different, real. I think this might actually make people proud to work here." Julian inclined his head. "That's the idea." A few more voices joined in, cautiously at first. This could improve brand image. Investors might like the shift toward social responsibility. Julian smiled faintly. "If they like it, good. If not, we'll still do it. Some things are worth doing whether they fit the spreadsheet or not." Laughter, soft but genuine, broke the tension. When the vote came, the motion passed unanimously. Afterward, as the directors gathered their papers, Julian stood. "Before we close," he said, "I want to say something that isn't in the agenda." The room stilled. "I owe you all an apology," he said simply. "Not for anything specific, but for the culture I allowed to grow here. For years, we measured people only by what they produced, not what they carried. I forgot that sometimes the strongest among us are the ones who show up even when life outside these walls is falling apart." He paused, his gaze drifting toward the window. "We're going to change that. Starting today." No one clapped. They didn't need to. The kind of silence that followed was the respectful kind. The kind that means people are really listening. After the meeting, David approached him near the elevator. "You sounded like someone who's stopped performing." Julian smiled. "Maybe I finally have." Marion joined them, handing over a printed copy of the new employee handbook draft. "You know," she said, "a few years ago, this company wouldn't have approved a policy like this." Julian looked at her. "A few years ago, I wouldn't have written it." As the elevator doors opened, Marion hesitated. "You might want to add a small section about ongoing caregiver training," she said. "Something about awareness workshops. You've got the best teacher in-house." Julian chuckled. "Already thought of that." That evening, back at the mansion, the light from the sunset painted the hallways in shades of copper and rose. Maya was sitting on the couch, folding laundry with the radio on low. Eli sat beside her, carefully matching socks by color. "How did it go?" she asked without looking up. "It passed," Julian said, setting his briefcase down. "Unanimous vote." Maya smiled. "I'm proud of you." He sat across from her. "You know, it was your voice in my head the whole time." She laughed softly. "I didn't say much." "You didn't have to, you just made sense of the noise." Eli looked up from his socks. "Noise?" Julian smiled. "The world makes a lot of it. Your Maya knows how to turn it into music." The boy giggled, dropping one sock and clapping his hands once, a small sound that filled the room like applause. Maya glanced toward the window, where the elm tree swayed in the wind. "Did you tell them?" "Tell them what?" "That humanity isn't a policy, it's a practice." Julian tilted his head. "Not in those words, but maybe they'll figure it out." She nodded. "They will. You just gave them permission." He studied her for a moment, then said quietly, "You could have stood beside me today, you know. You belong in those rooms." Maya folded the last shirt and set it aside. "My work isn't in rooms like that. It's here, reminding people why those rooms matter." Julian smiled. "You and your philosophy." "Not philosophy," she said. picking up Eli's sock and handing it to him. "Practice." Outside, dusk deepened. The first stars appeared, small, careful lights above a world that was learning how to slow down. Julian stood and extended a hand. "Come see something." Maya followed him to the balcony. Below, in the company courtyard, a group of volunteers were planting young trees under the new inclusion program. Employees, families, children. Each sapling had a tag tied to its stem, for someone who made the world quieter. Maya's breath caught. "That's beautiful." Julian turned to her. "You inspired that." She smiled, her eyes bright. "No, they just learned how to listen." He looked out at the glowing courtyard, the faint laughter of workers carrying through the night air. Somewhere behind them, Eli began to play a few notes on the piano. Hesitant, clear, sure. Julian exhaled. "You know," he said softly, "if the world ever forgets what grace sounds like, I hope it hears this." Maya nodded, her voice low. "It will. You just have to keep playing." And for a while, neither of them moved. The piano carried through the open window, the melody blending with the sound of wind in the trees, a song without words, but full of meaning. The calendar drifted quietly toward November, and with it came a day that Julian had marked every year, even when he pretended not to notice it. Evelyn's birthday. For years, he had spent it behind closed doors, working late, answering emails that didn't need answers, numbing the ache with routine. But this year, the day felt different. Not easier, just gentler. The morning began with a light fog curling over the garden. Dew shimmered on the petals of the roses, and the elm tree, now tall enough to brush the balcony, shed a few gold-tinted leaves that landed softly on the grass. Inside, the house was quiet except for the sound of Eli playing a tune on his small keyboard. Slow, hesitant, but clear. Maya entered the kitchen carrying a small candle in a glass holder. She placed it on the counter and lit it, the flame trembling for a moment before settling. "For her," she said softly. Julian looked up from his coffee. She would have liked that. Maya smiled faintly. "You told me once she loved light." "She did," he said. "She said a flame doesn't need to be strong. It just needs to stay." Maya nodded. "Then we'll let it stay." Eli wandered in, holding a small paper he'd been drawing on. He placed it on the table proudly. The picture showed 3 stick figures, one tall, one medium, one small, standing beneath a yellow circle. Above them, in his shaky handwriting, were the words, "Happy Light Day." Julian felt something tighten in his chest. "Where did you learn that phrase?" Maya smiled. "He asked me what a birthday really is. I told him it's a light day, the day someone's light began. He liked that." Eli pointed at the tallest figure. "Mama!" Julian's eyes stung. "Yes," he whispered. "That's Mama." They spent the morning preparing a simple breakfast. Pancakes, fruit, tea, no formal table setting, no ceremony, just warmth. Maya sliced strawberries while Eli arranged them into the shape of a heart. After breakfast, they went out to the garden. The sun was breaking through the fog, scattering light like glitter through the branches. Julian carried the candle, protecting the flame from the wind with his hand. Maya followed, holding a small box. They stopped beneath the elm tree. "This is where she would have wanted to be," Julian said quietly. Maya opened the box. Inside were 3 small candles, one for Evelyn, one for Julian, and one for Eli. 3 lights, she said. One for memory, one for love, one for what keeps going. Eli watched closely as she placed the candles in a row on the garden table. The match hissed softly as she lit the first one. "For Evelyn," she whispered. Then she nodded to Julian. He struck the next match, his hands steady this time. "For what we learned from her," he said. Finally, Maya held the third match out to Eli. "For what we're still learning," she told him. He looked at the flame curiously, then carefully touched it to the last candle. When it caught, he smiled, a small, proud smile. "Stay," he whispered. The word hung in the air like prayer. Julian's breath caught. It wasn't just that Eli had spoken clearly, it was what he'd chosen to say. The same word he'd used months ago in the courthouse, the same one that had carried through their lives like a thread of meaning. He knelt beside his son, his voice breaking. "Yes, buddy. Stay." Maya stood back, watching the two of them framed by light. For a long moment, no one spoke. The candles flickered gently in the breeze, their flames bending but never breaking. She thought of all the times the world had tried to blow them out, the rumors, the judgment, the loneliness, and how each time something steadier had kept them lit. Julian finally rose, wiping at his eyes. "You know," he said, looking toward the sky, "Evelyn used to say light is the one thing that never asks to be noticed. It just shines and lets people decide what to do with it." Maya smiled. Then she must be smiling now. They carried the candles to the edge of the garden, where the elm tree's shadow fell. Julian placed them on a small stone ledge and whispered, "For every storm survived." Eli leaned close and blew softly, not to extinguish the flames, but just enough to make them dance. The flicker reflected in his eyes like tiny suns. Later that afternoon, as they sat under the pergola, Maya brought out a small cake. Nothing elaborate, just vanilla with a single daisy on top. "He helped me make it," she said. Julian laughed quietly. "I can tell. The flower trail across the counter gave it away." Eli giggled, clapping his hands. "Cake!" They sang softly, no words, just a hum, a melody that didn't need a name. When the song ended, Julian whispered, "Happy birthday, Evelyn," and closed his eyes. For a long while, the three of them sat there in silence. The wind moved through the garden, carrying the faint scent of vanilla and sunlight. When evening came, the candles had burned low. Maya picked them up gently, pressing her fingers against the warm glass. "You can tell when a flame is about to fade," she said quietly. "But you can also tell when its light has already done its work." Julian nodded. "That's what this house feels like now. Not new, just alive again." Eli yawned, curling up against Maya's side. She brushed his hair softly. "He's growing," she said. "Every day, in ways we can't see yet." Julian smiled. "So are we." The sky deepened into twilight. The last bit of light hung over the horizon, painting the world in soft gold and blue. Maya looked at the elm tree, its leaves rustling gently. "Do you hear that?" she asked. Julian listened. "What?" "The sound of peace," she said. "It's quiet, but it's there." He followed her gaze and realized she was right. The garden, the house, even the city beyond, it all felt still. Not empty, but full of everything they'd worked to protect. As the final candle's flame wavered, Eli whispered again, eyes half closed. "Stay." Maya smiled, her voice barely audible. "Always." The wind carried the word into the dark, where it settled somewhere between memory and promise. And for the first time since Evelyn's passing, the house didn't feel haunted by her absence. It felt blessed by her light. Winter came quietly, carrying with it the kind of cold that didn't demand coats first, but silence. The garden slept under a thin layer of frost, the elm tree bare yet dignified, its branches tracing quiet patterns against the pale sky. Inside the mansion, warmth gathered in small ways, a kettle steaming, a piano key pressed softly, the hush of a page turning. These were the sounds of life that had learned to live without noise. Maya sat at the kitchen table with her cup of tea, watching Eli draw with colored pencils. He was sketching hands, dozens of them, each a different color, overlapping like petals. Above them, in his careful scrawl, he had written "Safe Hands." Julian entered, wearing a wool sweater and the faint, softened look of someone who had learned to slow down. "You're up early," he said. She smiled. "Habit. Some mornings feel too quiet not to greet." He glanced at the drawing. "That's beautiful, Eli." Eli looked up and grinned, then pointed at one of the hands. "Maya." She touched her chest, touched his hand, and nodded. "Yes, mine." "And this one's mine," Julian said, tracing the outline of a larger hand. Eli tilted his head. "All safe." Julian's eyes met Maya's. "He understands more than we think." "He always has," she said softly. Before Julian could answer, the doorbell rang. The sound startled the stillness of the morning. He walked to the door, opened it, and froze. Standing there, holding a brown envelope against her coat, was Judge Morrison. "Judge," Julian said, surprised. "Please, come in." The older man smiled faintly. "I hope I'm not intruding. I was in the area and wanted to deliver this personally." Maya wiped her hands on her apron and came forward, unsure. "Good morning, Your Honor." "Good morning, Ms. Ellison," he said kindly. "It's nice to see you without a gavel between us." She smiled. "You and me both." He handed her the envelope. "There's a letter inside. Read it when you're ready." Eli peeked out from behind the counter, curious. The judge's stern face softened instantly. "And this must be Eli. I've heard quite a lot about you." Eli gave a shy wave. Maya thanked the judge and saw him out. When she sat back down, she unfolded the letter. The paper smelled faintly of courthouse ink and cedar. Julian leaned closer. "What is it?" Her eyes skimmed the words, growing wide. "It's from the Child Welfare Advisory Board," she whispered. "They're inviting me to join." Julian blinked. "You mean, officially?" She nodded slowly. "As a consultant for caregiver training and inclusion." Eli looked up, sensing her excitement even if he didn't understand the words. "Good?" he asked. Maya smiled at him. "Good." Julian exhaled, a grin breaking through his usual calm. "Maya, that's incredible. You've been shaping lives quietly for years. Now the system wants to listen." She folded the letter carefully. "I'm not sure I belong there," she said. "I don't have degrees. I don't know the language they use." Julian shook his head. "You speak the only language that matters. You made people see dignity. That's more than policy ever will." She looked down at the letter again. "They want me to train new social workers, to teach them empathy and sensory care methods." "You already do that," he said. "You just never had a title for it." Eli tugged on her sleeve. "Go, Maya," he said softly. Maya smiled. "Maybe," she whispered. Later that day, she sat outside beneath the bare elm tree, the letter still in her lap. The air smelled like wood smoke and earth, and the sky had that pale silver tone of December mornings. She read the letter again, line by line, as if testing whether it was real. Judge Morrison's words stayed with her. "You see what others miss." When she closed her eyes, she thought about every family she'd met in passing. Parents in grocery stores trying to calm crying children. Neighbors whispering about bad behavior. Workers exhausted from caring without being understood. She realized they were all versions of the same story, people trying to keep their own light from being swallowed by misunderstanding. The next week, she accepted the invitation. Her first day at the advisory board wasn't glamorous. The building was gray, the coffee bitter, and the conference room smelled faintly of carpet cleaner. But when she spoke, people listened. She stood before a group of 30 new caseworkers, her hands clasped together to keep from fidgeting. "I'm not here to teach theory," she said. "I'm here to talk about listening. Not the kind you do with your ears, the kind you do with your patience." A young trainee raised her hand. "What's the first thing we should know when meeting a child like Eli?" Maya smiled gently. "Don't start by trying to fix them. Start by letting them feel safe enough not to hide." Another asked, "What if they don't speak?" "Then let silence be the language," she said. "It tells you more than words ever will." As the session continued, the room grew still. The usual note-taking stopped. People just watched her, hearing something that training manuals couldn't capture. When the talk ended, Judge Morrison, who had been sitting quietly in the back, approached her. "You were right where you needed to be," he said. Maya exhaled slowly, the tension finally leaving her shoulders. "Thank you for trusting me." He smiled. It wasn't trust, it was recognition. Back at the mansion that evening, Julian and Eli waited with a small surprise: hot chocolate, a bouquet of daisies, and a handwritten card from Eli that said, "Teacher Maya." She laughed, reading it aloud. "Teacher Maya, I suppose that's who I am now." Julian raised his mug. To the teacher who never stopped learning, she clinked her mug against his. To the student who finally did. Eli giggled, holding up his mug of warm milk. "To safe hands." They laughed, repeating after him. "To safe hands." That night, as the house fell into quiet, Maya sat by her window. The moonlight washed over the letter still pinned on the bulletin board, its black ink now familiar. Outside, the elm tree stood bare but strong. Its branches reached toward the sky like open hands. Ready, steady, patient. And for the first time in her life, Maya didn't feel like someone who worked behind the scenes of other people's stories. She felt like a chapter in her own. When she finally went to bed, she whispered a short prayer, not for success, but for steadiness. The kind of steadiness that lets light stay even when the world gets cold again. Spring returned almost shyly, as if asking permission to come back. The frost melted from the garden walls, birds found their way to the branches again, and the air carried that faint, impossible scent of new beginnings. 6 months had passed since Maya joined the Child Welfare Advisory Board. Her weeks were full now, meetings, training sessions, home visits. But somehow, her calm never changed. She still began each morning in the kitchen with tea, still checked that Eli's breakfast was warm, and still paused for one quiet minute by the window before stepping into the world. Today, though, she wasn't headed to the courthouse or a board meeting. She was going to the community center for inclusive learning, a new space built downtown for children like Eli. Bright rooms, gentle colors, teachers trained not in control, but in compassion. Julian had helped fund it quietly. His name wasn't on the building. That was his condition. "It doesn't need to be mine," he'd told her. "It needs to belong to everyone." As Maya approached the entrance, she noticed something painted on the wall beside the door. A mural of 2 hands forming the safe sign, surrounded by children's handprints in rainbow colors. Beneath it, written in childlike letters, were the words, "We listen here." She smiled. Inside, the sound of children laughing filled the hall. Some played with musical instruments, others painted. Eli was among them, seated at a small table covered in crayons. He looked up when she entered and waved, his whole face lighting up. "Maya," she crouched beside him. "Hey, sweetheart, what are you working on?" He held up a drawing, 3 stick figures under a green tree with wide branches. Above it, he'd written the word home. Maya blinked softly, her chest tightening. "It's beautiful," she said. Julian appeared a moment later, wearing casual clothes instead of the usual pressed suit. He looked almost unrecognizable, relaxed, unhurried. "He's been working on that all morning," he said. "Said he wanted you to see it first." She smiled. "He just did." As they talked, a young volunteer approached, a girl no older than 20. "Ms. Ellison," she said shyly, "would you mind saying a few words to the parents group? They've been waiting to meet you." Maya hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." In a nearby classroom, chairs had been arranged in a circle. A dozen parents sat waiting, some tired, some hopeful, some skeptical. The air smelled faintly of paint and coffee. Maya stood in the center, her palms open. "I'm not a professional speaker," she began, "and I don't have a perfect plan for anyone. But I know what it feels like to be scared. To think you're failing because the world doesn't know how to make space for your child. I've been there." The room quieted. She continued, her tone gentle, unhurried. "The truth is, every child teaches us how to love differently. Some do it with words, some with laughter, and some with silence. The job isn't to fix them. It's to build a world quiet enough for them to feel safe in." A man in the back raised his hand. "But how do you do that when people stare or judge?" Maya nodded. "You stay, that's all. You stay until they understand that love doesn't back away just because it's misunderstood." Her words settled over the room like soft rain. Some parents wiped tears quietly. Others just sat still, breathing a little easier. When the session ended, one mother approached her, holding her child's hand. "You make it sound possible," she whispered. Maya smiled. "It is, one calm at a time." Outside, she found Julian waiting near the garden behind the center. The children had painted rocks and arranged them in a circle, each with a single word written on top. Hope, listen, safe, love, stay. Eli was crouched among them, humming softly as he placed a daisy in the center. Julian nodded toward the scene. "He's making a ritual out of it." "He's making a memory," Maya said. "That's what love becomes when it stays." They watched as the boy adjusted one of the painted stones, turning it until the word "stay" faced upward. A photographer from a local magazine had arrived to cover the opening event, snapping candid shots of families and children. When he noticed Maya and Julian standing by the garden, he lifted his camera, but Julian shook his head. "No photos," he said gently. Maya smiled at him. "Still allergic to attention?" "Just trying not to steal the spotlight from the people who deserve it," he said. "Then you're finally learning," she teased. They both laughed, quiet and easy. Later that afternoon, the children gathered in the main hall to sing. Eli sat at the small piano at the front, his fingers tentative but sure. As the melody filled the room, Maya stood by the doorway, her heart swelling with pride. When the song ended, the applause came soft but genuine. Julian turned to her, his eyes bright. "He's not just playing notes anymore," he said. "He's speaking." "He always was," Maya said. "We just learned how to listen." The day ended with the children handing out drawings to the guests. Eli ran up to Maya with one in his hand, a new picture. This time it showed 3 figures again, but now the tree beside them was larger, its branches stretching all the way to the edges of the page. He handed it to her, smiling shyly. "For you." She looked down, noticing something written beneath the figures in his uneven letters. "Thank you for staying." Her voice caught. She knelt and hugged him tightly. "Always," she whispered. Julian watched, emotion tightening in his throat. He didn't speak, didn't need to. The moment said everything. As they left the center that evening, the sun hung low over the city, turning the windows gold. Children's laughter drifted behind them like a blessing. Driving home, Julian glanced at Maya. "You ever think about what's next?" She smiled faintly. "I don't need to. Next happens when you keep doing what's right." He nodded slowly. "Then I guess the world's in good hands." She looked out the window where the first stars were beginning to appear. "Not mine," she said softly. "Ours." Back at the mansion, Eli placed his new drawing beside the framed one from months before. The same 3 figures, now older, stronger, surrounded by color. Above both, Julian pinned a quote Maya had once said, now written in his handwriting. "Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just showing up and staying." The lights dimmed. The house fell quiet. But the stillness wasn't empty. It was full of the hum of something steady, enduring, and alive. And in the garden, the elm tree swayed under the evening wind, its branches rustling like applause for the small miracles that had learned to bloom beyond the mansion walls. Evening descended softly over the city, the kind of golden light that doesn't fall but settles, like dust, like memory. The Hartwell mansion glowed in that quiet hour between daylight and dusk. Somewhere in the kitchen, the faint hum of a dishwasher played its slow rhythm, and from the garden, the elm tree swayed as if breathing with the wind. Inside, everything was calm. Eli was in the music room, tapping gentle chords on the piano, his small voice humming in perfect rhythm with the keys. It wasn't a full song, not yet, but it was steady. His own way of saying the day had been good. Julian stood by the doorway, listening. He didn't want to interrupt. The boy had found something sacred in those few notes, peace that wasn't taught, only discovered. Maya entered quietly, her footsteps soft on the polished floor. She stood beside Julian, folding her arms loosely. "He's growing fast," she whispered. Julian smiled. "He's teaching faster." They both watched in silence. Eli pressed one final key and let the sound linger until it dissolved into the air. Then he turned and smiled at them, his face lit by the last orange light of the sunset. "Done," he said proudly. Julian clapped gently. "It was beautiful, son." Eli ran to Maya and tugged on her hand. "Your turn," she laughed. "I don't know if I can follow that." He nodded firmly. "Play." So she did. She sat at the piano bench, her hands hovering above the keys for a moment, then began a simple tune. Slow, delicate, filled with pauses that felt like breathing. It wasn't about perfection. It was about presence. Julian stood behind them, watching the scene framed in evening light. His son's head resting against Maya's shoulder, her fingers tracing melody, his heart quietly steadying to the rhythm. He thought of everything that had brought them here. The panic, the judgment, the courtroom, the garden, the candles. Each had been its own kind of storm, but each one had left something behind, stillness. Maya ended the song with a soft chord, then turned slightly. "You know," she said, "when I first came here, this house didn't make a sound. It just echoed. Julian nodded. I remember. Now, she continued, looking toward Eli, it hums. He smiled. That's because it finally has something worth echoing. They sat in the quiet for a while, listening to the faint ticking of the clock, the murmur of leaves outside, the world breathing as one slow, peaceful rhythm. Later, after Eli had fallen asleep, Julian and Maya stepped out into the garden. The night air was cool, but not cold. The city lights glittered faintly in the distance, small stars pretending to be closer than they were. They stopped beneath the elm tree, the same one they had planted together after the trial, the same one that had grown taller each season, its branches now strong enough to hold the wind without fear. Julian looked up at it. When we planted this, he said, I thought it was for Evelyn, but I think it was for us. Maya nodded. For everyone who needed to believe the storm could end. A small lantern hung from one of the lower branches, its light golden and soft. Julian reached out, adjusting it slightly so it cast a glow across the garden. He turned to her. Do you ever miss the noise? The city, the pace, the chaos? She smiled. Sometimes. But then I remember what quiet sounds like when it's earned. They stood together, listening. Somewhere nearby, an owl called once, and then silence settled again. Julian broke it softly. You know what I've learned from all this? What's that? That money can build walls, but love opens doors no key can lock. Maya tilted her head. You sound like you're writing one of your company's new slogans. He laughed quietly. Maybe I am. She looked around the garden, the soft glow of the lantern, the open windows, the faint music still drifting from Eli's room. I think you've built something better than a company, she said. You've built a home. Julian glanced at her. We did. She met his gaze, calm and certain. You kept your promise, to stay. And you kept yours, to teach us how. For a long while, they stood in silence, the kind that doesn't separate people but holds them together. Maya looked up at the branches above, tracing their shape against the stars. You know, she said, sometimes I wonder what silence really is. People think it means nothing, but it isn't empty. It's full of everything that matters. It's where love lives when words are done. Julian nodded slowly. The sound of safe silence. She smiled. Exactly. They began to walk back toward the house, the lantern light following their steps. Through the window, they could see Eli asleep on the couch, a blanket draped over him, his small hand resting on the edge of the piano bench. The safe card he'd made months ago was still taped above the keyboard, slightly wrinkled now but still holding its place like a guardian. Maya stopped for a moment, looking in. He's the proof, she said softly. That gentleness wins. Julian nodded. Always. Inside, she tucked Eli in properly, smoothing the blanket around his shoulders. Julian turned off the lamp, leaving only the moonlight to fill the room. As they stepped back into the hall, he paused by the framed photo on the wall, the one Eli had drawn, the 3 stick figures under the tree labeled home. Beneath it was the quote he'd written by hand. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just showing up and staying. He traced the words with his fingers, then looked toward Maya. That's what this house means now. Not a monument to loss, but a place that remembers what love does when it refuses to leave. She nodded. That's what all houses should be. Before she left for the night, Julian handed her a small envelope. What's this? She asked. He smiled. An idea, a new foundation, safe silence, For caregiver training, family support, and community programs, I want you to lead it." She opened the envelope. Inside was a simple logo, two open hands surrounding a small light. No slogan, no corporate branding, just an image of care. Her eyes filled with quiet tears. "Julian, you built this," he said. "I'm just naming it." Maya closed the envelope carefully, her hands trembling a little. "Then let's make sure it stays." As she stepped outside, the night air brushed her face gently. She looked back once, the mansion glowing warm, the elm swaying softly, the faint hum of music still in the air. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was leaving work behind. She felt like she was leaving light behind. And somewhere between the wind and the stars, the house seemed to whisper the same word that had carried them through every storm. Quiet, steady, unbroken. Stay.